What if the greatest mystery of reality isn't how everything began, but whether nothing ever truly was? On a quiet night, when even galaxies seem half asleep, join a whispered journey through quantum voids, cosmic lullabies, and the unsettling truth that silence itself might be full of secrets. This is not the story of creation. It's the story of the shadow it casts. The soft hum of the ceiling fan is the only sound piercing the silence of the study. Outside the window, the world has settled into that peculiar stillness that only comes in the hours between midnight and dawn. A cup of mint tea rests, untouched, on the desk, its warmth slowly surrendering to the cool night air. These are the perfect conditions for contemplating nothingness, not the superficial emptiness of an unreturned text message or a blank page, but the profound, absolute void that philosophers and physicists alike have struggled to define for centuries. Language betrays us immediately when we try to discuss this concept. The very word, nothing, is a paradox. By naming it, we give it form, stripping away the purity of its absence. Ancient thinkers understood this dilemma well. Parmenides argued that speaking of nothing was a logical impossibility, while the atomists insisted that the void was as real as the atoms moving through it. Centuries later, our understanding has grown more sophisticated, yet the fundamental mystery remains unchanged. Modern physics tells us that what we perceive as empty space is anything but vacant, a discovery that continues to unsettle our most basic assumptions about reality. Picture, if you will, a glass jar sitting on this desk. To the casual observer, it appears empty, just transparent walls surrounding vacant space. But the truth hidden within those smooth curves is far more interesting. Even if we were to remove every molecule of air, every speck of dust, even the faintest traces of moisture, the jar would still not contain nothing. Quantum field theory reveals that what we call a vacuum is actually a seething, bubbling ocean of potentiality, where particles flicker in and out of existence too quickly for our instruments to measure directly. This quantum foam, as physicists poetically call it, means that perfect nothingness may be impossible to achieve. Even in the most controlled laboratory conditions, the implications become even more profound when we expand our view beyond simple containers to the cosmos itself. Imagine erasing everything, every star, every planet, every stray atom, wandering through interstellar space. Surely, this would give us true nothingness. Not according to Einstein's theory of general relativity, which tells us that space and time themselves are physical entities with properties that persist even in the absence of matter and energy. The very geometry of space-time would remain, like an invisible scaffold, keeping the nothingness from being absolute. But let's push further. Suppose we attempt to eliminate space-time itself, to imagine a state with no dimensions, no before or after, no here or there. This is where our mental faculties strain against their limits. The human mind evolved to navigate a world of objects and events, not to comprehend the absence of the very framework that makes objects and events possible. Try as we might, any conception of absolute nothingness we conjure inevitably smuggles in some shred of existence, be it an observer to witness the nothing, or a mathematical concept to describe it. Perhaps this is why the vacuum of space, however empty it may appear, continues to surprise us with its activity. The Casimir effect demonstrates how so-called empty space can exert measurable forces. Virtual particles emerge briefly like ghosts before vanishing again. Even in the deepest voids between galaxies, quantum fields vibrate with latent energy. The universe appears fundamentally opposed to true nothingness, as if emptiness itself is an impossible state that reality continuously resists as dawn approaches. And the first birds begin their morning songs outside. I'm left staring into my now cold tea, cornering a peculiar thought. Maybe the reason we struggle so profoundly with the concept of nothing is because there's no such thing to comprehend. Like a fish trying to imagine a world without water, where, attempting to conceive of a state that may not just be unknowable, but non-existent in any meaningful sense. The very laws of physics, the mathematical truths underlying reality, even the structure of our own consciousness, all these seem to require some form of existence against which to define their absence. Yet the question lingers, hanging in the air like the last wisp of steam from my forgotten tea. If absolute nothingness is truly impossible, what does that say about the nature of reality? Okay? Are we living in a universe where something had to always exist? Key? Or is our very framing of the question flawed from the outset? These are the thoughts that will carry us forward into our next exploration, where we'll examine the most startling possibility of all, that not only did nothing never exist, but it never could have. The quiet hum of the fan continues as the night surrenders to morning, a subtle reminder that even in stillness, there is always motion, always something rather than nothing, always a presence beneath the apparent absence. The truth may be that we live in a universe where silence is never truly silent, where darkness is never fully dark, and where emptiness is merely a different kind of fullness we don't yet understand. The morning sun now paints amber streaks across the study walls. Yet, the questions from our nighttime meditation linger like stubborn dreams resisting dawn's clarity. That persistent teacup from last chapter, now rinsed and upturned on the drying rack, serves as mute testament to our struggle. If even a simple glass vessel cannot truly be empty, how could the vast cosmos ever achieve nothingness? Modern physics presents us with an astonishing revelation, what we colloquially call nothing, okay? In fact, be the most interesting something in existence. The quantum vacuum isn't just reluctant to be empty. It seethes with such ferocious potential that entire universes might spontaneously emerge from its depths. This isn't poetic metaphor, but mathematical certainty, written in the language of quantum field theory. The equations tell us empty space possesses an inherent energy density, a sort of existential hum that cannot be switched off. Consider the curious case of virtual particles, ghostly apparitions that materialize in perfect vacuums, drawing energy from nowhere before disappearing again. These quantum fluctuations aren't mere theoretical constructs. We observe their effects physically in laboratories worldwide, most notably through the Casimir effect, where uncharged metal plates in a vacuum mysteriously draw together, pushed by the invisible hands of particles that aren't there. The harder we try to create perfect nothingness, the more vigorously reality reminds us of its fundamental refusal to comply. The implications grow more profound when we examine cosmic scales. Inflationary cosmology suggests our entire universe may have begun as one such quantum fluctuation, a temporary bubble of order in the seething quantum foam that somehow, against impossible odds, failed to immediately collapse back into oblivion. This theory elegantly solves numerous puzzles about our universe's structure, while simultaneously presenting us with a breathtaking existential cone. Perhaps everything we know emerged from what should have been nothing. Qua was never truly empty to begin with, but here our thinking hits another wall. Even if we accept this quantum genesis story, we're left to grapple with the nature of the space in which these fluctuations occurred. The inflationary field itself, the quantum foam, the mathematical laws permitting such behavior, these all constitute a framework that stubbornly resists classification as nothing. Theoretical physicist Lawrence Krauss famously argued this constitutes nothingness. But philosophers countered that mathematical laws and quantum fields are undeniably something. The debate reveals how our definitions strain under cosmic scrutiny. The room grows warmer as midday approaches. Sunlight glints off the upturned glass, casting fractal patterns on the notebook where our nighttime musings are recorded. To confront a possibility more unsettling than any quantum paradox. Perhaps nothingness isn't just difficult to achieve, but fundamentally impossible. Not merely because we can't create it in practice, but because the very concept may be a flawed mental construct, a shadow cast by our limited cognition, trying to grasp realities beyond human experience. As afternoon shadows lengthen across the study floor, we turn to cosmology's most promising theories of everything. String theory suggests all existence might be vibrations in 11-dimensional hyperspace. Loop quantum gravity proposes space-time itself is quantized. These frameworks contain potential solutions to our dilemma, mathematical descriptions of how something could emerge from nothing without violating physical laws. Yet tellingly, none can describe true nothingness without smuggling in some primordial structure, some fundamental mathematical truth that precedes existence. The day's contemplation circles back to where we began, the realization that nothingness may be humanity's most persistent illusion. From quantum foam to cosmic inflation to multiverse theories, every scientific exploration reveals new layers of something where we expected to find absence. The universe appears rigged against nothingness at every scale, from the subatomic to the cosmic. As twilight paints the sky in hues of indigo, we're left with a transformed understanding. That teacup on the rack isn't a failed experiment in emptiness, but a perfect demonstration of cosmic truth. Its empty space hums with quantum potential, just like the vast intergalactic voids, both equally pregnant with unmanifest possibility. Tomorrow, we'll examine what this means for the origin of all things, if nothing cannot be. Then, perhaps, the universe has always been, in some form, beyond our current comprehension. But that's tomorrow's conversation. For now, in the quiet evening light, there's profound comfort in this revelation. When you gaze into the void, and the void gazes back, you're not seeing nothing. You're seeing everything in its most subtle, essential form, the ground state of existence itself, awaiting the right conditions to blossom anew. Night returns to the study, though the questions have refused to depart through all the changing light. That same teacup turned upright again. Fresh leaves steeping releases, tendrils of bergamot-scented steam that twist like quantum filaments in the lamplight. We come now to the heart of the matter. If absolute nothingness is impossible, then what does this say about existence itself? The answer lies waiting, not in abstract equations, but in ordinary observation. Consider fire, that most primal human companion. A flame cannot exist in nothingness. It requires fuel, oxygen, heat, yet the most illuminating truth appears in its absence. When flames die, they don't vanish into nothing, they transform. Smoke rises, heat dissipates, matter changes states. This simple lesson from our ancestors reveals what modern physics confirms. Existence appears fundamentally conservative, refusing annihilation, permitting only rearrangement. Relativity and quantum mechanics, those twin pillars of modern physics, sing the same truth in different keys. Einstein showed us mass energy cannot be destroyed, only converted. Quantum theory demonstrates particles blinked in and out of observable existence, but always within fields that persist. Even the mysterious dark energy accelerating cosmic expansion suggests not creation from nothing, but the unveiling of potential inherent to space itself. The universe seems hardwired against true annihilation. This brings us to the most profound implication. Existence may be eternal. Not necessarily in its current form. Galaxies will fade. Stars will exhaust their fuel, but in some essential nature, the Big Bang might better be called the Great Transformation. A phase change in eternal existence rather than an absolute beginning. This view solves the nagging question of what preceded the cosmos, while introducing new mysteries about the underlying nature of reality. Your teacup trembles slightly as a night breeze finds its way through the window. In its rippling surface, we see reflected the quantum fields that underpin reality, always present. Even when their excitations, what we call particles, are not. The Higgs field, the electromagnetic field, the gravitational field, these are not things in space, but the very fabric of space itself. Modern physics suggests we inhabit a universe where existence isn't just persistent, but fundamental, where the real mystery isn't how something came from nothing, but how the rich diversity of experience emerges from such unity. Moths circle the lamp in erratic orbits as we confront the ultimate implication. If existence cannot not be, then perhaps being is the default state of reality. This turns centuries of philosophical inquiry on its head. We've asked why there is something rather than nothing. But if the premise is flawed of nothingness was never an option, then we've been chasing a phantom. The question morphs. Why this particular arrangement of something? Why these physical laws? Its cosmological structure. As the night deepens, quant physicist John Wheeler's concept of a participatory universe comes to mind. The notion that observation shapes reality. This isn't mystical thinking, but recognition that in quantum systems, measurement affects the measured. Extending this insight, we might view reality not as something that is, but as something that happens, an ongoing process rather than a static state. Perhaps existence persists because it is, at base, an eternal verb rather than a noun. By this late hour, even the ideas seem to shimmer like heat waves above a desert highway. That persistent teacup, now holding only dregs and memories of aroma, stands as mute testament to the paradox. After 3 chapters plumbing the depths of nothingness, we've found only endless layers of something. The night's final realization settles like sediment in the cup's depths. The human mind may never comprehend true nothingness because we are, at our core, expressions of relentless existence. When you next encounter silence between notes of music, or darkness behind your closed eyelids, remember, these are not absences, but different kinds of presence. The universe appears determined to be in myriad forms across cosmic time. Tomorrow, we'll explore what this means for our place in the cosmos, how eternal existence shapes mortal experience. But for now, in this quiet hour, rest easy, knowing you're swimming in an ocean that cannot empty, only change its currents. The lamp flickers once before steadying, its light persisting through the window until dawn, like existence itself, alike. The questions that will greet us when next we meet in this space between thoughts. The teacup sits empty once more, not barren, but patiently waiting. Moonlight pools around its rim like liquid silver, distorting reflections of the night sky. Beyond the window, there's a question lingering in the steam that never quite rises. It's a riddle woven into the silence between heartbeats. If existence refuses to cease, then what exactly is it doing? Perhaps reality breathes, not in the mechanical sense of lungs, expanding, but in the cosmic rhythm sung by galaxies spiraling, its particles entangling, quantum waves collapsing and reforming. Eastern philosophies spoke of prana, the animating breath of the universe. Modern cosmology finds its counterpart in vacuum fluctuations, the unending pulse of virtual particles appearing and vanishing too quickly to measure. Even entropy, that relentless force dragging stars toward cold equilibrium, may be less about decay than transformation, the universe exhaling structure only to inhale new possibilities. Consider the humble dandelion. Press its seated head to your lips and blow a momentary breath scatters 100 fractal parachutes to the wind. Each carries potential for new growth, but only through surrender to unseen currents. This mirrors how photons behave when we measure them not as predictable particles, but as probability waves collapsing into specific locations. The act of observation is like that breath, shaping reality. By interacting with it, your fingers idly trace the cooling porcelain of the teacup. The act itself stirs air molecules, disrupts electrostatic forces, alters the quantum state of atoms at your fingertips. Nothing is truly passive in this cosmos. Not the cup, not the hand that touches it, not the space between them. Fields hum beneath the surface of all interactions. Space-time flexes under the weight of mass. The chair you sit on remains solid only because electromagnetic forces refuse to let your atoms merge with its owner. It's a perfect standoff of existential persistence. Here lies the revelation. Existence isn't a static state, but a process and ongoing negotiation of forces that could have settled into simplicity, yet chose complexity instead. The universe could have been a uniform soup of quarks and leptons. Instead, it folded itself into galaxies, neurons, sonnets, and the fragile wisps of chamomile still clinging to your cup. Darkness deepens beyond the window. A meteor streaks across the sky, a speck of cosmic dust, meeting our atmosphere in a fiery negotiation between existence and transformation. Even in destruction, reality affirms its persistence. The meteor doesn't vanish, but becomes ions, light, heat. From quark to cosmos, the pattern holds. Change is the only constant, yet cessation remains impossible. By the time dawn's first light stains the horizon pink, the teacup's shadow stretches long across the desk. Its once sharp edges blur in the growing illumination of fitting metaphor. Like shadows, our categories of something and nothing may be projections, not fundamental truths. Perhaps the real mystery isn't why there's something rather than nothing, but why we ever believed the distinction mattered. In our next meeting, we'll trace this thread through the labyrinth of consciousness where the illusion of separateness dissolves entirely. But tonight, as the stars fade into blue, ponder this. Every breath you take is part of a conversation the universe began before time had meaning, okay? And in that exchange, nothingness found, no purchase only, the endless, shimmering dance of being. The cup waits, the air hums, existence continues. Dust motes swirl in the slanted afternoon light of the study, catching gold as they pass through sunbeams. The abandoned teacup from previous nights now holds rainwater collected from an unexpected storm, nature's quiet reminder that even our most carefully maintained vessels are subject to forces beyond design. This water, fallen from skies and pooled in ceramic, becomes a lens through which to examine reality's most persistent illusion. It's a notion that things are ever truly separate at all. Quantum entanglement demonstrates this truth at the smallest scales. Particles, born together, remain mysteriously connected across any distance, their fates intertwined, regardless of intervening space. But we needn't peer through electron microscopes to witness this principle. Your fingertips brushing the cup's rim demonstrate the same phenomenon. The boundary between hand and porcelain dissolves under scrutiny into a dancing lattice of atoms that never actually touch, hovering nanometers apart due to electron repulsion. Where does the cup end and your skin begin? The distinction melts like fog in morning light. Consider how we define objects. The book exists as separate from the shelf beneath it only because our senses and language conspire to name them differently. At the quantum level, both consist of vibrating, temporary configurations of the same fundamental fields, like whirlpools in a shared stream, maintaining temporary distinction while being fundamentally inseparable from the flowing whole. Tea's jasmine scent, now rising from the rainwater, is likewise not a separate entity, but air molecules arranged in a particular pattern of vibration, the universe sniffing itself. This realization ripples outward through every aspect of existence. The study's wooden desk was once a living tree exchanging carbon dioxide with the same air you now breathe. Your breath may contain atoms that once fueled its growth. The copper piping bringing water to the house contains stellar material forged in supernova that predate Earth itself. We swim in an ocean of shared substance, endlessly recombined but never destroyed. Even time's apparent divisions, past, present, future, begin dissolving under examination. Craves, each moment contains echoes of all that came before and seeds of all that will emerge. Your memories exist as electrical patterns in the present moment's brain activity. The future waits as potential encoded in the current arrangement of matter and energy, not as something separate, but as the next ripple in an endless cascade. The rainwater has grown still enough to reflect the ceiling's cracks. Observe closely. In the illusion of surface breaks, pollen grains float, suspended between depths and reflection, inhabiting both worlds at once. This is our condition, beings suspended between scales, forever too large to perceive quantum unity directly yet too small to grasp cosmic wholeness. Our perception relies on boundaries evolution carved for survival, not truth, as dusk gathers, blurring the study's edges into gloom. A deeper understanding settles like the sediment at the cup's bottom. Separation is the dream. The teacup doesn't reside in space. It is space locally configured. The thoughts you call yours arise from neural patterns written in ancient stardust. The breath you just exhaled will circulate through sycamores and storm clouds before returning to some future. Long night falls completely now, somewhere beyond the window. The same moonlight that silvered your cup's REM tides through a spider web strung between jasmine vines, each dewdrop hanging suspended. Perfectly distinct, perfectly inseparable from the whole glittering design. The monsoon arrives without ceremony. Rain drums against the study's window panes in arrhythmic patterns, while jasmine petals scatter across the sill like abandoned love letters. The teacup from yesterday's meditation now catches this floral snowfall. Porcelain cradling an accidental bouquet of rainwater and bruised petals. There's poetry in how objects find new purpose when their primary functions fade. This teacup no longer serves steeped leaves, but it holds the storm's offerings with the same quiet dignity. We might learn from its adaptability when confronting. Our topic today, how emptiness isn't absence, but transformation wearing different garments. Quantum physics confirms what poets have long suspected: nature abhors a true vacuum. What we perceive as void thrums with unseen activity. Between the nucleus and electrons of the teacup's atoms lies inconceivable emptiness. Yet, this nothingness spawns nuclear forces binding matter together. The space between raindrops vibrating against the window contains fluctuating electromagnetic fields that will outlast our solar system. Even the air's apparent stillness deceives. Molecules ricochet at bullet speeds while quantum wave functions collapse and bloom in ceaseless choreography. Emptiness exists only as a relational concept, temporary configuration of potentials awaiting form. Consider the shattered edge where the cup's rim meets stormlight. When I found it last spring beneath the wisteria arbor, its cracks resembled lightning forks frozen mid-stride. Running a finger along those fractal fractures now, I note how each fissure hosts its own microscopic ecosystem mineral deposits, from evaporated tea, pollen grains trapped during summer breezes, flecks of skin from fingers like mine that touched the ceramic over decades. The French call these signs of use crazing, the fine web of cracks that accumulates in glaze over time. But the Japanese gun your wisdom. They name it kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer. Where Western thought sees damage, Eastern tradition perceives augmented beauty. As quantum field theory sides with the Japanese, the cracks don't diminish wholeness, they become new sites for splendor. Twilight deepens outside, turning the raindrops into liquid prisms that scatter lamplight across the desk. These beads of water demonstrate another truth: boundaries are largely conventions of perception. Where does a raindrop end and the puddle begin? At what point does a tea's bergamot scent cease being aroma and become simply air? The empty cup before me brims with these unanswerables. its void a mirror for larger cosmic mysteries. Scientists now suspect black holes, those ultimate symbols of emptiness, may actually encode information about everything they consume on their event horizons, like fingerprint residue on a wine glass. Destruction becomes preservation, wearing different robes. When I lift the cup to drink the accidental petal tea, the water's surface trembles. Ripples radiate outward until they fragment against a porcelain edge, snot vanishing, but translating their motion into the material memory of ceramic. In physics, we'd call this principle conservation of energy. In poetry, mutability. In lived experience, the bittersweet recognition that endings birth new modes of being. The storm outside accelerates, yet the teacup remains poised between my palms simultaneously, vessel and content, boundary and flow, artifact and living process. It occurs to me that we are all such vessels, defined as much by our absences as our substances, our scars as much as our smooth surfaces. The jasmine petals have begun decomposing in their rainwater brew, surrendering color and structure to create something else, a pale, fragrant ichor that will eventually nourish the vine's roots when poured onto soil tomorrow. Transformation requires this dissolution of previous forms. Stars must become nebulae before birthing planets. Thoughts must unravel before new understanding crystallizes. The teacup's true lesson emerges. It isn't holding emptiness, but potential masquerading as absence, like the quantum vacuum's seething virtual particles. What appears to be nothing is actually everything in preparation for its next becoming. Dawn approaches with tentative light. The storm has passed, leaving the air scrubbed clean and glittering. Near the window, a spider recommences weaving its web between jasmine stems, each radial thread strung with leftover raindrops that refract sunlight into miniature rainbows. The teacup sits abandoned again on the sill, its remaining water evaporating into the humid morning. Perhaps this is the final revelation. The universe refuses true voids because the concept itself is flawed. Emptiness doesn't precede form's silent twin, its necessary counterpart, the hollow reed through which existence breeds its endless variations. Like the spider's web that requires open spaces between silken strands to function, reality needs what we naively call nothingness to structure its coherence. The cup is, and is not, empty, just as we contain and are contained by absence in every moment. Even as I write these words, the letters take shape around the spaces between them. The page's whiteness holds the ink as much as the ink claims the page. There is no vessel without void, no music without silence between notes. Only this infinite, shimmering exchange, this sacred reciprocity between being and its imagined opposite, that makes existence possible at all. Dawn bleeds through the study's east-facing windows, staining the abandoned teacup's shadow a watery blue where it spills across the desk. The spider's web outside trembles with its freight of dewdrops, each suspended jewel fracturing sunlight into spectra that dance on my notebook's blank page. This quiet hour holds a secret physics and poets share. What we call nothing is simply the interval where transformation hasn't yet declared its new shape. The jasmine petals at the cup's bottom have surrendered their perfume to rainwater overnight. What remains are translucent ghosts of Bloom's cellulose lace, still clinging to memory of scent. I lift a cup and watch tendrils of dead flower flesh swirl in circular currents, obeying fluid dynamics as reliably as planets orbit stars. At this scale, the distinction between organic and inorganic blurs. Both succumb to the same relentless mathematics. The petal's cellular structure decays into sugars that feed unseen bacterial life, cannibalizing life at magnitudes beneath perception. Morning's slanting light reveals what night's concealed dust motes adrift between my face and the cup's rim. These interlopers aren't imperfections in emptiness, but proof of its impossibility. Air currents toss them in chaotic arabesques, their paths dictated by variables too numerous to compute. The sigh of my breath still heavy with sleep. Vibrations from trucks rumbling 3 streets away, convection rising from cooling tea. An infinity of forces converge in each particle's dance. Nothing moves without the universe realigning itself around that motion. Outside, the waking garden thrums with electromagnetic chatterbees tuning their wing beats to floral electric fields. Chlorophyll capturing photons in chemical swoons, roots conducting slow dialogues through fungal networks. Even what appears inert participates. Stones gather dew through capillary action. Fence posts oxidize in communion with damp air. The teacup's porcelain slowly hydrates where glaze has chipped away. So-called inanimate objects merely operate on timelines too gradual for animal nerves to register. I press my thumb against the cup's fracture line, that jagged seam where porcelain meets atmosphere. Calloused skin meets microscopic valleys in the ceramic, yet never truly touches. At the nanoscale, electron clouds repel one another with immutable force. Our illusion of solid contact depends on this infinitesimal buffer, the same gap separating stars, the same pause between heartbeats that allows rhythm to exist. The morning matures. Sun strengthens its claim on the desk's geography, chasing shadows into sharper relief. The teacup warms in my palms, its remaining water now a broth of decomposed petals and dust. When I tilt it toward the light, the liquid becomes a lens, refracting sunbeams into patterns on the wall, elongated ellipses that shudder with my pulse. There's allegory here, how emptiness bends perception, how absence focuses attention, how vessels shape their contents as much as contents define vessels by midday. The storm's last gift evaporates from the cup's depths. Only faint tannic streaks mark where water once pooled, memory etched in chemical traces. Yet the emptiness feels different now, charged with potential, ripe for infusion. Not absence, but anticipation, wearing stillness like a cloak. When monsoon winds next rattle the window, this porcelain will once again transform from thought to container, from object to process, from relic to living participant in the eternal. It's negotiation between fullness and its many splendid disguises. Even as I set it back on the shelf, the cup continues, its invisible work humidifying air, exchanging heat with the room, slowly weathering toward some future where its shards might one day nourish new soil. Nothing is ever truly passive. Energy merely changes, addresses distributing itself across space-time's ledger in ceaseless reassessment of value and position. Silence isn't sound's absence, but its reservoir. Stillness isn't motion's opposite, but its gathering phase. The pause between notes births the music, just as the interval between atoms binds the material world. Twilight will find the cup waiting, patient as sedimentation, porous as pumicets, emptiness, no longer vacancy, but invitation. And when next filled, that first sip would taste of mysteries older than porcelain, when stardust first learned the alchemy of becoming clay. But that's tomorrow's revelation. For now, sunlight pools in its hollow without judgment, and the spider respines her web between jasmine stems. And the whole breathing world hums its singular, fragmented song of non-separation. The moon hangs over the study like a lost coin in dark water, silvered and wavering at the edges. The teacup, forgotten again, catches this celestial light in its curve, spinning a distorted reflection across the porcelain. Tonight, the air smells of wet earth and old books, of wood polish settling into the grain of the desk. We measure time by the slow drift of shadows across familiar objects, yet we forget that even shadows are evidence of presence, the act of absence only made visible by obstruction. There is music playing somewhere distant, a piano murmuring through open windows from another house. The notes arrive in fragments, the spaces between them carrying as much meaning as the sounds themselves. A melody is not simply the pressing of keys, but the exhale between presses, the silent suspension that allows anticipation to form. This is why we speak of rests in musical notation, because silence has structure, rhythm, a weight that shapes sound into meaning. The universe operates the same way. What we perceive as void is not the absence of activity, but activity of a different register one. Our senses have not learned to decode. The teacup remains cool against my palm, still faintly redolent of bergamot, despite having been rinsed countless times. The persistence of scent is a lesson in itself, molecules clinging to microscopic pores in the glaze, refusing oblivion. We think of forgetting as passive, but true erasure requires work. Defaults to preservation in some form. Even when stars die, they scattered their elements across light years, carbon becoming diamond, iron becoming blood, oxygen becoming breath. Nothing is lost in the way we imagine loss, only redistributed, reconfigured, renamed. Wind slips through the screen window, carrying pollen from the jasmine vine outside. Some will land in the empty cup, grains drifting to settle at the bottom like the first sediments of new geology. It might seem wasteful reproduction, cast blindly into the night. Yet this apparent randomness belies an elegant precision. Each grain carries the possibility of continuance, a coded set of instructions for becoming. The universe has always operated this way, potential masquerading as accident, necessity disguised as chance. Near midnight, the piano falls silent. The absence of notes stretches thin, then dissolves into the ordinary sounds of night crickets measuring temperature with their legs, leaves scuffing against pavement, pipes whispering inside walls. I lift the cup to my lips automatically, forgetting it holds nothing. The habit of thirst persists after the quenching. This too is part of the pattern, how rituals outlive their utility, how the shape of longing remains even when its object changes. Our bodies are made of such leftover impulses, ancient adaptations now serving different purposes, an affinity for sugar left over from scarce millennia. The startled response no longer needed for lions, but flaring at car alarms nonetheless. When I tilt the cup toward the lamplight, a single fingerprint smudge glows on the rim oil from my skin, persisting despite washing. Evidence accumulates this way, in the almost invisible, at the edges of notice. Quantum theory tells us particles wink in and out of measurable existence, but perhaps they never leave, only move into wavelengths we cannot perceive. The past might operate similarly, not gone, but folded into the present's fabric. Teacup is proof, a London purchase from a shop long shuttered, handled by hands now buried. Its travel here predicated on histories of trade routes and porcelain, techniques carried across dynasties, all of it live in its materials. Eventually, the moonlight shifts enough that the cup's reflection slides from the desk to the bookcase, where it quivers across leather spines and gilded titles. I think of Heraclitus watching the same river, recognizing the persistence of pattern despite endless renewal. The cup will be filled again tomorrow, and the water will remember nothing of tonight's emptiness, but the space inside it holds the memory anyway, not as experience, but as possibility. The way all silences contain the rhythms of speech not yet given form. By 3 a.m., even the insects have stilled, leaving only the refrigerator's hum and the intermittent creak of settling wood. The cup rests on the windowsill now, catching first dew as the temperature drops. It grows cold to the touch, porcelain, contracting slightly, the ghost of afternoon warmth long dissipated. There is comfort in this reliability, the way heat always moves toward equilibrium, the certainty of transfer and transformation. If nothing else, physics proves this. Energy does not vanish, it simply becomes something else, slower, quieter, less recognizable. Two instruments calibrated for bolder signatures. Dawn arrives in increments, softening the darkness until objects regain their edges. The cup emerges, first its white curve, a pale comma against the dark wood. Soon, birds will begin their morning reconnaissance, testing the air for danger and opportunity. The first one alights on the jasmine vine, causing petals to shudder free. Some will fall into the cup's mouth new offerings for whatever transformation comes next. Absence was never the truth, only a pause between states, the precise calibration of conditions required for the next inevitable becoming. In the end, the universe doesn't concern itself with emptiness, only ever the movement through it. The afternoon storm left the study walls damp with humidity, the plaster exhaling decades of trapped whispers as the temperature dropped. Dust, motes that have floated undisturbed for months now, swirled in sluggish currents along the baseboards, rearranging themselves into temporary constellations. The teacup sat askew on the windowsill, half filled with rainwater the color of weak tea, its handle casting a curved shadow against a peeling paint-tan elegant cipher, repeating itself in miniature across the grain of the wood. Shadows have always known what light struggles to understand, that absence is never complete, only negotiated through subtler terms. Rainwater in the cup had softened the remnants of yesterday's tea leaves into something resembling wet ash. When I stirred them with a finger, it swirled upward in languid spirals before settling back into their silent communion with porcelain. Watching the patterns dissolve felt like witnessing entropy in its gentlest form, not destruction, but graceful surrender to equilibrium. The leaves would eventually become sediment, then dust, then particles carried away on some future breeze. At no point would they cease existing. They would simply loosen their claim on form until unrecognizable. Like all things steeped long enough in time, they taught the same lesson. There are no final endings, only thresholds of perception. Somewhere, beyond the study door, footsteps passed a neighbor climbing the stairs to their apartment. Each creaking tread, a reminder of the building's unseen life. Wood remembers every touch, after all. Floorboards warp under years of passing weight. Door frames soften where hands have brushed them daily. Even walls curve slightly where bookshelves have pressed their persistent argument against gravity. The teacup on my sill bore, similar witness sits, glazed surface smoothed by decades of fingertips, a chip near its base, recording an unknown accident from before it came into my possession. Objects carry memory differently than flesh, but no less indelibly. The past inks itself into surfaces through use and abrasion, through the faint acids of skin and the slow violence of oxygen. What we call where is merely the visible accumulation of relationship. Through the half-open window came the smell of wet pavement, and, beneath it, the mineral sigh of thawing earth. Spring was negotiating its terms with the last stubborn pockets of winter. A sparrow landed on the fire escape, its claws clicking against iron as it eyed the teacup's watery contents. I watched its throat flutter that vulnerable pulse beneath. Feathers and thought of how even the most fragile creatures bend the world around them. Nest twigs redirect wind currents. Dropped seeds fracture concrete. Tiny bones become fossils that outlast civilizations. Nothing passes without consequence, however faint its signature. The afternoon aged toward evening, and the cup's shadow stretched across the sill like an idea forming. As lamplight struck the rim, and noticed what daylight had hidden a hairline crack running from lip to base, nearly invisible unless viewed at this specific angle. The cup had been broken all along without my realizing. Its integrity maintained by some delicate balance of glaze and surface tension. It put me in mind of quantum superposition, that strange moment before observation collapses possibility into fact. Perhaps all broken things exist simultaneously as whole and fractured until some precise interaction forces revelation. We, too, might walk through our days more damaged than we appear, held together by habits and hopes rather than actual soundness. When I lifted the cup to examine the crack, my breath disturbed the water's surface, sending concentric ripples rushing toward the edges. They rebounded upon meeting resistance, interfering with themselves in complex patterns. Each disturbance left its mark not erased, but integrated into subsequent movements. Just as every weather system inherits the momentum of those before it, the past never really dissipates. It simply becomes part of tomorrow's equations. Even this simple teacup held centuries of history in its curve, the volcanic origins of its clay, the generations of artisans who perfected porcelain, the hands that packaged and shipped it across oceans to reach this modest apartment. The water inside it had fallen from clouds that formed over distant mountains, had slid down leaves and rooftops before finding temporary harbor here. Nothing is ever just itself. Dusk thickened outside, turning the window into a smoky mirror, where my reflection hovered ghost-like behind the cup's silhouette. Strange how reflection depends equally on presence and absence. The pane of glass both separates and connects, like the event horizon of a black hole or the charged space between neurons. Each requires duality to function. The cup was neither wholly mind nor independent, neither empty nor full, neither broken nor intact. Binary thinking fails before such ambiguity. Eastern thought grasped this better than Western science ever has, that contradictions often signal deeper truth, lurking beneath language's clumsy categories. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, and the teacup that can be definitively measured contains no tea at all. By midnight, I still hadn't moved the cup, fascinated by how moonlight now transformed its water into a mercury-like pool. The crack I'd discovered earlier shimmered like a vein of quicksilver running down the porcelain. Somewhere a dog barked twice and fell silent, leaving only the refrigerator's occasional mutter. The building settled into its nocturnal rhythms, pipes contracting, someone's television flickering through walls, the scent of late-night toast drifting down air vents. All of it happened around the teacup's quiet vigil on the sill, that modest curve holding its bit of captured sky. For all our fascination with emptiness, perhaps we fail to recognize containment as its own kind of fullness. The cup existed at the intersection of countless visible forces, the Earth's rotation tilting moonlight through its water, atmospheric pressure testing its fragile crack, gravity patiently negotiating with surface tension. We imagine objects as static, but they're more like musical instruments vibrating at frequencies below human perception. Even the most solid-seeming things are lively with internal conversational electrons in perpetual motion, atoms dancing their infinitesimal gavotte. The teacup hummed with this same vibrant stillness, this poised tension between form and dissolution. It would outlast me by centuries or shatter tomorrow beneath careless fingers. Both possibilities. It's equally true until circumstance chose one. Near dawn, the birds began again, first tentative chirps, then full-throated declarations as light grew. The cup's water had evaporated slightly overnight, leaving a tide mark just below the crack. Something about that imperfect ring felt emotionally precise, of dents of time's passage made visible, like wrinkles or tree rings. All containers eventually betray their contents this way. Wine glasses leave ghostly imprints. Rivers carve canyons. Love letters fade to illegibility. The cup's faint stain seemed less a defect than a record of service, the way hands grow calloused from work, or a favorite knife loses its edge through use. Perfection makes poor company anyway. It's the scars and stains that give things character. First sunlight struck the windowsill, and for one breathless moment the cup's shadow appeared to contain ripples, some lingering memory of last night's disturbed water imprinted on darkness. Then the angle shifted, and the illusion dissolved. The mind seeks patterns, even where none exist. Or perhaps the opposite is true, that patterns exist everywhere, and we only perceive the loudest ones. The cup held no answers, only mute patience as the day warmed around it. Some questions aren't meant for solving, leave for carrying like a cracked vessel holding precious liquid through careful balance, not despite its fracture, but through it. Not yet empty, simply between chapters, the first frost of autumn etched fern-like patterns across the study window, the crystalline branches bifurcating in delicate fractures that mirrored the cracks in a neglected teacup. Cold had seeped into the room overnight, stiffening the pages of open books and slowing the pendulum clock to a tired tick. The cup sat where I had left it weeks ago, the shallow pool of rainwater now frozen into a milky lens that warped the porcelain beneath into strange new geometries. Time works these small alchemies when we aren't looking, transforming offerings into artifacts without ceremony. A curious thing happens to porcelain in freezing temperatures. The glaze contracts slightly, faster than the clay body, creating microscopic stresses that reverberate through the material's crystalline structure. The ancient Ming potters understood this instinctively, storing their wares in kilns that cooled at precisely calibrated rates. My poor cup had undergone no such pampering. Years of thermal shock scalding tea, followed by cold rinses. Summer heat yielding to winter drafts had quietly accumulated in its lattice matrix. Only now, with ice expanding deliberately between its cracks, did the damage declare itself plainly. Memory works similarly. The events we believe pass unnoticed persist as latent impressions, waiting for later conditions to activate them. Psychologists call this the reminiscence effect, how forgotten experiences suddenly surface decades later when triggered by some sensory echo. The teacup's flaws told the story of past accidents just beginning to surface, fractures propagating slowly through time like delayed revelations. I ran a finger along the newest crack's feathery edge and wondered what other invisible fault lines ran through my life, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. Outside, the rising sun set the frosted glass ablaze. Refracted light bent through the ice lens in the cup's ball, projecting a shimmering mandala onto the opposite wall. The effect lasted only minutes, just long enough to notice how beautifully broken things can rearrange. Illumination before the ice began weeping its slow surrender to warmth. Meltwater traced the cracks like a cartographer, outlining new continents, darkening the porcelain wherever it traveled. Patterns emerged in the dampness, branching networks resembling river deltas, neurons, lightning strikes, nature's preferred geometries repeating across scale. By noon, only a dark stain remained at the cup's bottom, shaped like the silhouette of some unknown island. The ice had changed the vessel more than I'd anticipated, not just aesthetically, but structurally. A hairline fracture near the handle wept slow tears whenever filled now, though strangely, only with hot liquids. Cold water remained contained, as if temperature itself governed the thresholds of disclosure. Physics offers explanations, thermal expansion, the Cooper-Hurst effect in porous materials, was standing there with my leaking artifact. I found myself contemplating more ancient wisdom. The Japanese art of kintsugi came to mind, where broken pottery is repaired with gold lacquer to highlight rather than hide its fractures. Perhaps flaws are not deficiencies, but another mode of beauty, the cracks, coming vessels for new meanings. The afternoon passed in quiet observation. As sunlight moved across the study, the cup's shadow morphed continuously now, squat and stolid when the sun stood high. Later, stretching into a slender crescent that pointed toward my unfinished manuscript like an accusation. Shadows are merciless, historians preserving temporary arrangements that daylight forgives. Tea stains on the desk, fingerprints on the window glass. The slight depression in the chair cushion testified to habits I'd thought ephemeral. We leave such traces everywhere, oblivious to what the light reveals when striking surfaces. At oblique angles, by twilight, the cup held only memory of moisture, faint tide mark, and the ghost of bergamot that no amount of rinsing could erase. Scent persists like that, clinging stubbornly to materials long after its source has vanished. 19th century letters often carried traces of their author's perfume decades later, and archaeologists can still detect ancient spices in millennia-old pottery shards. Teacup's aroma was its own kind of archive holding echoes of every infusion it had ever contained. Each leaving molecular footprints in the glaze's microscopic pores. Nothing truly disappears. It only retreats beyond our crude instruments of detection. Dinner came and went. The moon rose full and heavy, its light transmuting the cup's white curves to lunar pallor. Under this colder illumination, the cracks stood out like veins in a marble statue, not flaws, but channels for some vital essence. I thought of rivers carving canyons, glaciers sculpting valleys, wrinkles mapping a lifetime of expressions onto skin. Time's signature appears first in these subtle fractures before progressing to outright demolition. The cup would eventually shatter completely, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps in a century, but tonight it remains suspended between integrity and dissolution, containing its absence with quiet dignity. Hours passed without notice until dawn's first pallor bleached the stars from the sky. A thin rime of frost coated everything, the windowsill, the bookshelves, even the abandoned teacup that had started all this contemplation. The cold had worked its way deeper overnight, splitting the newest fissure further upward toward the rim. Each passing winter would widen it incrementally until one day, during some routine washing, the cup would separate into halves along this fault line with a sound like frozen twigs snapping. But not yet. Morning light found it still whole, still holding vigil on the sill where I'd left it months before, changed but recognizable, damaged but persistent. Like all survivors, days would continue folding into one another, seasons cycling through their familiar revolutions. The cup would hold tea again once I found courage to test its wounded integrity. Water would seep through its cracks sometimes, requiring coasters and apologies when guests visited. Eventually, it might become purely ceremonial, too fragile for daily use, yet too meaningful to discard. Most objects reach this stage if they last long enough, too broken for function, but too saturated with the memory to throw away. We keep them in display cases or attic boxes, these wounded veterans of domestic life, honoring their persistence while acknowledging their limits. Later, warming my hands around a replacement mug, watch the sunlight creep across the sill toward the aging teacup. For all our talk of emptiness, perhaps the deeper revelation lay in recognizing how thoroughly everything retains its history. Not as museum pieces frozen in time, but as living palimpsest, continuously rewritten by use and accident. The cup was becoming something new with every fracture, every stain, every icy morning it endured. Not the pristine vessel it had been when first pulled from its shipping crate years ago, but something more interesting, record of survival in 3 dimensions. By noon, the frost had retreated to the lawn outside. The study walls exhaled damp warmth as heating pipes knocked to life in the teacup. It waited patiently on its sill, embracing the sunlight that streamed through its damaged flank to cast jagged rhomboids across the floor absence and presence, collaborating once again to make patterns more beautiful than either could manage alone. Somewhere beyond the window, winter prepared its next move. But for now, there was only this fragile equilibrium, this moment when broken things hold together long enough to reveal why they mattered in the first place. The study had assumed a different rhythm since winter's retreat, settling into the slow decay of abandoned spaces. Dust lay thick over my unfinished manuscript, smoothing the edges of each page into a monochrome blur. A spider had taken up residence behind the bookshelf, its web stretched taut between 2 volumes of Philosophio and Nietzsche. If the faded spines revealed anything in inadvertent commentary on the fragility of intellectual ambition. And the teacup once the centerpiece of these late-night meditations, now cradled a miniature forest of mold where rainwater had pooled. Months earlier, its porcelain stained with colonies of emerald and slate blue. Neglect has its own alchemy. Left untouched, objects become archives of their minor apocalypses. The teacup's interior looked celestial now, its bacterial constellations spreading in slow nebulas across the glaze. What had begun as a few stray spores had flourished into an entire ecosystem, feeding on the tannins and sugars of evaporated tea, digesting time itself into visible form. I had read somewhere that the stains left in teacups, those stubborn rings, even scrubbing couldn't remove, were actually bacterial fossils, microscopic organisms that had bonded irrevocably with the ceramic. The thought made me hesitate before wiping it clean. Who was I to erase this evidence of persistence? The desk beside it fared no better. Ink had bled from an uncapped pen, branding the wood grain with dark tributaries reminiscent of far-off rivers seen from an airplane. Papers curled at the edges from humidity, their words smudged in places where condensation had blurred the ink. A coffee ring overlapped the corner of an old shopping list, obscuring half the items. The effect was oddly beautiful, these inadvertent palimpsests of accident and intention, records of distraction, layered upon distraction. Even the books had begun to warp slightly, their pages breathing in the damp air like leaves preparing to unfurl. The window, left ajar during a spring rain weeks ago, bore its own transformations. A patina of pollen and urban grime had settled into a filigree on the glass, softening the sunlight into something diffuse and dreamlike. Through its smudged lens, the world outside appeared gentler, the jasmine vine blurred into an impressionist smudge of green. The distant roofs of buildings, rendered in watercolor grays. Neglect had curated the view, editing harsh lines into ambiguity. It occurred to me then that forgetting is probably its own kind of perception. The longer we look away from something, the more it changes into what it was always meant to become, something less defined by our attention, more by the slow processes of the world. The spider, undisturbed, had grown bolder. I watched as it descended from its web on an invisible thread, legs testing the air before alighting upon the teacup's rim. It moved with the confidence of something that had claimed this territory. There was something biblical about it, not the spider so much as the image it conjured, life reclaiming the artifacts of human preoccupation. Nature had no reverence for the purposes we assigned objects. A teacup was just another surface, another shelter, another scaffold for the business of living. The mold, too, was indifferent to porcelain's original purpose. It did not wonder why it had been placed there, or whether its presence was intended, simply grew because conditions allowed it. I left the cup untouched, unwilling to disrupt its metamorphosis. Time and moisture had already remade it into something beyond my original understanding. The fine cracks branching through the glaze now hosted microscopic life. The chip on its rim, once an accident, had become a vantage point for the spider. Even the stains of evidence of my carelessness had transformed into fertile ground for other organisms. The cup was no longer just a vessel. It was a habitat. The afternoon deepened, and outside, the sounds of the neighborhood continued without me. A dog barked, a car passed, children's laughter spiraled up from the street, but the study remained suspended in its own quiet rhythm. Dust motes floated through sunbeams. The spider retreated to its web. The mold expanded invisibly, cell by cell. My books sat in silent vigil, their ideas ossifying as slowly as sediment hardening to stone. And the teacup, forgotten yet alive, with small transformations, taught its most humbling lesson yet, that neglect is not the absence of change, only change, liberated from human expectation. Eventually, the light shifted. Evening draped itself over the shelves, turning the dust to gold before extinguishing it in shadow. Air settled. Everything seemed to exhale: the books, the desk, the cup, the spider in its web. I watched the room settle into its own abandonment. And then, because I am only human, I reached out, lifted the cup, and without deciding, carried it to the sink. The water ran clear at first, then streaked with green and gray, then clear again. The mold vanished down the drain. The spider fled. The cracks remained, but the life they had harbored was gone. Just like that, I undid months of unintended creation. The clean cup sat dripping on the drying rack, looking somehow smaller than before. I half expected to regret what I'd done, this erasure of an entire microcosm, but the feeling didn't come. The truth was, nothing had been lost, only rearranged. The mold would bloom elsewhere. The spider would spin new webs. The teacup would stain again. I left it there to dry overnight. By morning, a fine skin of dust would already be settling on its surface. New spores would drift in through the open window. And somewhere, a different narrative would begin. Morning light filtered through the study window, casting a soft glow over the teacup that had returned to its place on the sill. It sat there, freshly washed, yet somehow still marked by its history. The porcelain gleamed, but the cracks remained silent witnesses to the passage of time and the stories it had held. I found myself drawn to it again, not as a mere object, but as a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even after being stripped of its previous life, it could still hold potential for new experiences. The cup had been cleansed of its mold, yet it was not empty. It was simply waiting for the next infusion of meaning. As I prepared my morning tea, I reflected on the cycle of neglect and renewal that had unfolded in the study. The act of cleaning had felt like a small betrayal, yet it also opened the door to possibility. The teacup, once a vessel for forgotten remnants, was now a blank slate, ready to embrace whatever I chose to pour into it next. I filled it with steaming water, watching as the heat danced along the edges, creating tiny ripples that shimmered in the light. The tea leaves, dark and fragrant, swirled in the water, releasing their essence into the cup. It was a simple act, yet it felt profound, a ritual of transformation that echoed the larger cycles of life. Outside, the world was waking up. Birds chirped in the jasmine vine, their songs weaving through the air like threads of a tapestry. The garden, once dormant under winter's grip, was now bursting with life. New buds unfurled on the branches, and the earth exhaled the rich scent of damp soil. I could see the jasmine flowers beginning to bloom, their delicate petals unfurling to greet the sun. Nature was in a constant state of renewal, a reminder that life persists even in the face of neglect. The teacup, too, was part of the Sasicla vessel that could hold not just tea, the essence of moments yet to come. As I sipped my tea, I allowed my thoughts to drift. The warmth spread through me, a gentle reminder of the comfort found in small rituals. Each sip was a connection to the present, a moment of mindfulness that anchored me in the here and now. I thought of the spider that had once spun its web in the corner, of the mold that had flourished in the cup, and of the stories that had unfolded in this space. Each element had played its part in the narrative of the study, contributing to the tapestry of existence that surrounded me. The teacup, now filled with fragrant tea, became a focal point for my reflections. It was a reminder that even the most mundane objects could hold significance, that they could be vessels for memory and experience. I considered the many cups I had owned over the years, each one a repository of moments shared, laughter with friends, quiet mornings spent in solitude, the comfort of a warm drink on a cold day. Each cup had its own story, its own history, and yet they all converged in this one moment, in this one teacup. As the day unfolded, I found myself drawn back to the study, Time and again, I would sit at the desk, pen in hand, and let my thoughts flow onto the page. The teacup remained nearby, a constant companion in my creative process. It held not just tea, but the essence of inspiration, the warmth of ideas brewing in my mind. I began to see it as a partner in my writing, a silent witness to the words that flowed from my pen. Tella, the act of writing, became intertwined with the act of sipping tea, each sip fueling my thoughts. Each word a testament to the power of creation. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting dappled shadows across the room. I took breaks to wander outside, to breathe in the fresh air and feel the warmth of the sun on my skin. The garden was alive with colored vibrant greens, soft yellows, and the deep purples of blooming flowers. I marveled at the resilience of nature, how it thrived despite the harshness of winter. It was a reminder that life is a series of cycles, each one leading to the next, each one filled with potential. In the evenings, Ty would return to the study, the teacup still waiting patiently on the sill. I began to experiment with different teas, each one bringing its own flavor and aroma, its own story to tell. I found joy in the ritual of preparation, in the way the leaves unfurled in hot water, releasing their essence into the cup. Each evening became a celebration of the ordinary, a moment to pause and reflect on the day's events. The teacup, once a vessel of neglect, had transformed into a symbol of renewal, a reminder that even the simplest acts could hold profound meaning. As the weeks passed, I noticed changes in the study itself. The dust that had settled in the corners began to dissipate as I took the time to clean and organize. The spider's web, once a testament to neglect, was carefully removed, making way for a new sense of clarity. I found myself drawn to the act of creating order, of reclaiming the space as a sanctuary for my thoughts. The teacup remained a constant presence, a reminder of the journey I had taken from neglect to renewal. One afternoon, as I sat at the desk, I felt a surge of inspiration. The words flowed effortlessly onto the page, each sentence building upon the last. I lost track of time, completely absorbed in the act of creation. The teacup, filled with a fragrant blend of chamomile and lavender, sat beside me, its warmth radiating comfort. I paused to take a sip, allowing the soothing flavors to wash over me. In that moment, I felt a deep connection to the cup, to the tea, and to the act of writing. It was as if the teacup had become a vessel, not just for liquid, but for creativity itself, as the sun dipped below the horizon. Casting a warm glow across the room, I leaned back in my chair, a sense of fulfillment washing over me. The teacup, now empty, had served its purpose for the day. I felt a sense of gratitude for its presence, for the way it had accompanied me on this journey of rediscovery. It was more than just a cup. It was a reminder of the beauty found in the ordinary, the magic that could emerge from the simplest of rituals. In the days that followed, I continued to explore the relationship between the teacup and my creative process. I began to experiment with different teas, each one evoking different emotions and memories. The act of brewing became a meditation, a way to ground myself in the present moment. I found joy in the ritual of preparation, in the way the steam curled upward, carrying with it the essence of the leaves. Each cup became a new beginning. It's a fresh opportunity to connect with my thoughts and ideas. The study transformed into a sanctuary of creativity, a space where I could immerse myself in the act of writing. The teacup, now a cherished companion, held the warmth of inspiration and the promise of new stories waiting to be told. I began to see the world through a different lens, noticing the beauty in the mundane, the poetry in everyday life. The teacup had become a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even the most ordinary objects could hold extraordinary significance. As the seasons changed, so too did my relationship with the teacup. It became a vessel for not just tea, but for memories, for moments of reflection and for the stories that unfolded in the quiet of the study. I found myself sharing its presence with friends, inviting them to join me for tea and conversation. Each gathering became a celebration of connection, a reminder that the act of sharing is as important as the act of creation. The teacup, once a forgotten relic, had transformed into a cherished artifact of my journey. It held the echoes of laughter, the warmth of friendship, and the beauty of shared moments. I realized that neglect had not diminished its value. Rather, it had enriched it, adding layers of meaning that could only be revealed through time. The cracks in its surface were no longer flaws, but stories etched into its being, reminders of the journey it had taken alongside me. As I sat in the study, surrounded by the warmth of the teacup and the glow of the setting sun, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey from neglect to renewal had taught me valuable lessons about resilience. It's about the beauty found in imperfection and about the power of small rituals to transform our lives. The teacup, once a vessel of forgotten moments, had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the face of neglect, new beginnings are always possible. And as I took a final sip of tea, I knew that the story of the teacup was far from over. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with endless possibilities waiting to unfold. A fine mist clung to the window panes this morning, transforming the garden beyond into a watercolor landscape where shapes bled into one another. The teacup's familiar silhouette loomed clearly through the vaporous veil, its form distorted slightly by the uneven glass, like a memory one can never quite resolve into perfect clarity. I had left it overnight with the dregs of yesterday's purr still, clinging to its bottom in intentional act of abandonment to see what time would make of it. The tea had evaporated unevenly, leaving behind a blackened tide line that resembled some ancient shoreline pressed into sedimentary rock. When I lifted the cup, a faint medicinal scent rose from the residue, earthy and slightly metallic, the aroma of fermentation arrested mid-process. The porous ceramic had absorbed these lingering molecules so thoroughly that rinsing would never fully purge them. The cup had been changed at some fundamental level, consecrated by repetition into something more than porcelain. Even the cracks, those hairline fractures I had once considered flaws, now served as capillaries, distributing the essence of every infusion into the vessel's very structure. Rain began pattering against the window, each drop exploding against the glass before joining its brethren in trails meandering downward. The sound created a syncopated rhythm with the ticking clock, marking time and competing tempos, nature's improvisation against human measurement. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, fascinated by how quickly condensation formed around my fingertips. The teacup answered this gesture by fogging slightly from the warmth still radiating through my hands. Its porcelain and skin engaged in a silent dialogue of temperature exchange. By the time the downpour eased, afternoon light had dissolved into that peculiar silver gloaming peculiar to rainy days. The cup stood sentinel at the window's edge, catching diffused illumination that made its glaze appear liquid. I contemplated filling it, but hesitated at the realization that each new brew would continue altering its nature irrevocably. Even untouched, the atmosphere was working, its alchemy, humidity, swelling microscopic fissures, its airborne spores seeking purchase, ambient dust settling into a fine veil. Nothing ever truly pauses in its transformation. Stillness is merely change, proceeding at scales we cannot perceive. I took the cup to the kitchen, where fractured light from the pendant lamps threw overlapping shadows against the walls. The process of cleaning it this time became ceremonial warm water at a precise temperature, a soft brush moving in concentric circles, the patient rinsing until the runoff went clear. Yet, when held to the light, the ghost of every infusion still lingered like a watermark. Centuries of tea drinkers had understood this. The Chinese had a term for it, tea mountain. referring to the patina that accumulates inside pots with decades of dedicated use, making even plain water taste of leaves long vanished. Night fell as I deliberated between oolong and aged white tea, eventually selecting a tightly rolled ball of Phoenix Dankong that unfolded in the steaming water like a desert bloom after rain. The leaves released their nectar slowly, turning the liquor a luminous amber that glowed against the cup's white walls. Each sip carried not just flavor, but the cumulative weight of every brew that had come before the cup's memory, manifesting as subtle undertones that no pristine vessel could replicate. It struck me then how we inhabit similar patinas, the way our skin holds every scar and freckle like tea stains in porcelain, how our bones develop microfractures that knit stronger, how flavors of past experience seep into our present selves until they become inseparable from who we are. We consider ourselves singular entities moving through time when in truth we are palimpsests, our current form merely the latest iteration of all we've contained. I left the cup unfinished that night, curious what the dawn would reveal. Darkness settled over the study like a healed breath, broken only by the occasional gleam of light catching the cup's rim when clouds parted. The tea cooled gradually, its volatile compounds rearranging themselves into new configurations as molecular motion slowed. By midnight, a fine skin had formed on the surface, not mold this time, but tea oils coalescing into delicate fractal patterns that shimmered like oil on water whenever moonlight found them. By morning, the tea had oxidized to a deep umber. Its aroma shifted from floral to something more like damp forest floor after autumn rains. When poured out, it left behind stains more vivid than before, not the ghostly remnants of past cleansings, but bold, vascular tracings that branched through the cup's interior like a diagram of some strange circulatory system. This would be the brew that finally etched itself into the ceramic soul, crossed the threshold from temporary occupant to permanent resident. The cup had achieved what collectors call raising that mysterious moment when a vessel transcends its materiality to become something alive with history. No longer just a container, but a repository of moments preserved in microscopic fissures and tannin deposits. Each future infusion would now converse with this accumulated memory, the old and new engaging in silent alchemy behind the porcelain veil as I filled it once more with fresh leaves and boiling water. A thread of steam curled upward to blend with morning mist outside the window. For the first time, I understood that impermanence and permanence were not opposites, but collaborators, that what truly lasts is precisely the accumulation of all that changes. The cup would never be clean again in the original sense. It had become something greater by forfeiting that possibility, and I, drinking from it as afternoon light gilded the edges of everything, felt the strange comfort of holding something that had learned to carry its history with quiet pride. The rain returned near dusk, soft at first, then building to a crescendo that blurred the world beyond the glass. The teacup warmed between my palms, its heat radiating through the subtle cracks no longer considered flaws, but rather conduits, ways for the vessel to breathe, to remember, to persist. Every sip now contained both the present moment and every steep that came before. Every holding of the cup felt like communion with all the hands that would ever lift it, long after my own had vanished into time's ceaseless flow. When I placed it back on the sill, the last drops still swirling in its depths, the liquid caught moonlight, strangely refracting through microfissures to cast watery constellations across the desk. God, the teacup would never be empty again, not truly. It had learned to hold more than just tea. It held time itself. The following days unfolded like a series of quiet revelations, each one layered upon the last, as if the universe were slowly revealing its secrets through the simple act of brewing tea. The teacup, now a vessel of history, became a focal point in my daily rituals. Each infusion was a conversation, a dialogue between the past and the present, where the flavors of the tea intertwine with the memories embedded in the porcelain. I found myself drawn to the study more than ever, the air thick with the scent of leaves unfurling in hot water, the gentle steam rising like whispers of forgotten stories. As I settled into this new rhythm, I began to notice the subtle changes in my surroundings. The dust that had once gathered in corners now seemed to shimmer in the light, each particle a tiny universe of its own. The spider had returned, spinning a new web in the same corner where it had once thrived. I marveled at its industriousness, how it wove its silk with purpose, creating a delicate tapestry that caught the light in intricate patterns. The study had transformed into a sanctuary, a space where the mundane and the extraordinary coexisted, where the teacup served as a reminder of the beauty found in imperfection. One afternoon, as I prepared a new blend of tea, I felt a surge of inspiration. The act of brewing had become a meditation, a way to ground myself in the present moment. I carefully selected a mix of jasmine and green tea, the fragrant leaves promising a delicate balance of floral notes and grassy undertones. As the water boiled, I watched the steam curl upward, a dance of heat and moisture that seemed to echo the rhythms of my own thoughts. I poured the water over the leaves, and they began to unfurl, releasing their essence into the cup. Aroma filled the room, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. With each sip, I felt a connection to the teacup that transcended its physical form. It was no longer just a vessel. It had become a partner in my creative process, a silent witness to the words that flowed from my pen. I began to write with renewed vigor, the pages filling with thoughts and ideas that had long been dormant. The teacup, with its cracks and stains, served as a metaphor for my own journey, reminder that beauty could emerge from imperfection, that resilience could be found in the most unexpected places. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself exploring the stories that lay hidden within the teacup's surface. I began to imagine the lives it had touched, the hands that had held it, the conversations that had unfolded over cups of tea. Each crack told a story, each stain a memory. I envisioned a lineage of tea drinkers, each one adding their own essence to the cup, creating a tapestry of experiences that transcended time. The teacup had become a vessel, not just for tea, but for connection, a bridge between past and present, between solitude and companionship. One evening, as I sat in the study with the teacup cradled in my hands, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. I thought of my grandmother, who had introduced me to the world of tea when I was just a child. She had a collection of delicate porcelain cups, each one a treasure in its own right. I remembered the way she would brew her favorite blends, the ritual of steeping leaves and waiting for the perfect moment to pour. Her laughter would fill the room as we shared stories over steaming cups, the warmth of the tea mirroring the warmth of our connection. In that moment, I realized that the teacup was not just a physical object, it was a vessel of memory, a conduit for the love and wisdom passed down through generations. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lineage of tea drinkers that had come before me, for the way they had shaped my understanding of the world. The teacup had become a symbol of continuity, a reminder that we are all part of a larger narrative, woven together by the threads of shared experience. Inspired by this realization, Kay decided to write a series of stories centered around the teacup, each one exploring the lives of those who had held it before me. I envisioned a narrative that spanned generations, tracing the cup's journey through time and space. Each story would be a vignette, a snapshot of a moment in history where the teacup had played a role in intimate gathering, a quiet reflection, a celebration of life's milestones. I felt a surge of excitement as I began to outline the tales that would unfold, each one a tribute to the connections forged over cups of tea. As I delved into this new project, I found myself spending more time in the study, surrounded by the familiar scent of tea and ink. The teacup became my muse, its presence inspiring me to explore the depths of my imagination. I began to experiment with different writing styles, weaving together prose and poetry, allowing the stories to take on a life of their own. The act of creation became a dance, a fluid exchange between the teacup and my pen, each sip fueling my creativity. The seasons shifted outside, the garden transforming from vibrant greens to the warm hues of autumn. Leaves began to fall, carpeting the ground in a tapestry of gold and crimson. I found solace in the changing landscape, the rhythm of nature mirroring the ebb and flow of my own creative process. The teacup remained a constant presence, a reminder of the beauty found in the passage of time. Each day, I would fill it with a new blend, savoring the flavors as they unfolded, allowing the tea to guide my thoughts. One particularly crisp afternoon, I decided to take my writing outside. I set up a small table on the patio, the teacup perched beside me as I watched the leaves dance in the breeze. The air was filled with the scent of wood smoke from a nearby chimney, mingling with the earthy aroma of fallen leaves. I poured myself a cup of spiced chai, the warmth of the spices wrapping around me like a cozy blanket. As I sipped, I felt a sense of connection to the world around me, the teacup serving as a bridge between my inner thoughts and the vibrant life unfolding outside. With each word I wrote, I felt the stories coming to life. I imagined a young woman in the 1920s, sipping tea in a sunlit parlor, her laughter mingling with the sound of jazz music drifting through the open window. I envisioned an elderly man in the 1950s, sharing stories of his youth with his grandchildren. The teacup, a vessel for both nostalgia and wisdom. I saw a group of friends gathered in the 1980s, their conversations punctuated by the clinking of cups, the warmth of friendship enveloping them like a cherished memory as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the patio. I felt a sense of fulfillment wash over me. The teacup had become more than just a vessel. It was a portal to the past, a reminder of the connections that bind us across time. I realized that the stories I was writing were not just about the teacup itself, but about the shared human experience, the laughter, the tears, the moments of joy and sorrow that define our lives. That evening, as I returned to the study, I placed the teacup on the desk, its surface still warm from the chai. I felt a sense of reverence for the object that had inspired me so deeply. It was a reminder that even the simplest things could hold profound meaning, that the act of sharing tea could create bonds that transcended generations. I knew that the stories I was writing would honor the lineage of tea drinkers who had come before me, weaving their experiences into a tapestry of connection. As I settled into my chair, its pen poised over the page, I felt a surge of gratitude for the journey I had undertaken. The teacup had become a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of neglect, new beginnings were always possible. It had taught me to embrace the beauty of imperfection, to find joy in the ordinary, and to celebrate the connections that enrich our lives with each stroke of the pen. I felt the stories unfolding, the teacup guiding me through the labyrinth of memory and imagination. I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with endless possibilities waiting to be explored. A keeper, once a forgotten relic, had transformed into a cherished companion on my journey, a vessel of creativity, connection, and the enduring power of shared moments. And as I wrote, I felt the echoes of those who had come before me, their laughter and stories intertwining with my own, creating a rich tapestry of life that would continue to unfold with each new infusion. The teacup had developed a fine network of cracking across its surface, nearly invisible unless caught in afternoon light at just the right angle. These delicate fractures mapped the passage of time like rings in a tree, documenting every temperature change from boiling water to cold rinses over the years. I ran my finger along one particularly pronounced line that curved from rim to base, remembering the winter morning it had appeared, a sharp crack sounding through the quiet kitchen as steam rose from my morning elong. What had seemed like destruction at the time had become simply another layer in the cup's story, another threshold crossed in its transformation from pristine object to something more interesting. Morning sunlight spilled through the study window, catching motes of dust that swirled above the desk like miniature constellations. The cup sat, bathed in this golden haze, its irregular shadow stretching across my notebook's open pages. I had taken to leaving it out overnight rather than washing it immediately. An experiment in observing how residue accumulated, a thin, amber ring marked yesterday's pearl infusion, blending with older stains beneath the glaze ingredients. Archaeologists might one day study like geological strata. Already a new patina was forming, each brewing, layering tannins and oils into the porcelain's microscopic pores until the vessel itself became infused with memory. Outside, rain began pattering against the glass in erratic rhythms. The garden beyond blurred into impressionistic swaths of green as water droplets distorted the view. I watched a spider reconstruct its web between jasmine stems with practiced efficiency, silk glistening with moisture. The whole scene felt suspended halfway between dissolution and renewal. The rain stripping away summer's dust while encouraging new growth. Nature seemed determined to remind me that nothing ever truly ends. It only changes form. I turned my attention back to the cup, rotating it slowly to observe how light interacted with its imperfections. The cracks scattered illumination like prisms, casting many rainbows across my fingers. What had once been flaws now served as conduits for beauty, transforming brokenness into unexpected artistry. The longer I looked, the more I saw microscopic pits where tannins had accumulated in fractal patterns, faint discolorations where heat had altered the glaze's molecular structure, nearly invisible hairline fractures radiating outward from the rim like wrinkles around a smiling eye. The cup had earned these marks honestly, each one representing some minor cataclysm survived. The afternoon unfolded in quiet contemplation. Shadows crept across the floorboards as clouds moved overhead, their shapes morphing continuously like ink blots in a psychological test. I found myself recalling how my grandmother used to read tea leaves, turning the cup clockwise 3 times before interpreting the patterns left behind. Her readings had always been equal parts theater and intuition, a performance that nonetheless carried glimpses of uncomfortable truth. The residue in my cup held no such prophecy, just the physical proof of time's passage marked in tannins rather than minutes. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the world dripping and refreshed. A cool breeze carried the scent of wet earth through the open window, mingling with traces of bergamot rising from the cup. I took a sip of tea, gone cold, the flavor more muted but somehow richer for having steeped all afternoon. Time had smoothed its edges, mellowed its bitterness, allowed subtler notes to emerge. The change wasn't deterioration so much as transformation, another example of how duration altered everything it touched. Night fell softly, bringing with it the hush that arrives when the world turns inward. The teacup's outline became indistinct in the growing darkness, its form blending with the shadows until only its silhouette remained a curve against a window pane backlit by distant street lamps. Even unseen, its presence persisted, radiating quiet warmth into the surrounding space like a stone retains heat after baking in summer sun. The cup didn't need to be held to be felt. Its influence extended beyond touch. In the days that followed, I noticed myself developing new rituals around this weathered vessel. I began collecting fallen petals from the garden to float in its water jasmine blossoms that perfumed each sip with their delicate sweetness. Sometimes I'd leave it in sunlight to watch how heat intensified the aromas, or set it near open books, so the steam could mingle with the scent of paper and ink. The cup became both companion and collaborator, its character deepening with each interaction. One particularly bright morning revealed something unexpected where tea had evaporated. Along one particularly deep crack, crystalline deposits had formed. These delicate structures bloomed like frost flowers across the porcelain surface, their feathery patterns resembling ferns fossilized in amber. The phenomena fascinated me, how neglect had created accidental beauty, how time and chemistry had conspired to produce artwork no human hand could replicate. I left the crystalline formations undisturbed, wanting to observe their evolution. As summer waned, the teacup's transformations slowed but never ceased. Patience revealed their gradual progressions, the way stains darkened incrementally, how cracks widened almost imperceptibly, how the crystalline deposits grew more intricate week by week. These changes operated on timescales normally invisible to human perception, reminding me that urgency was largely an illusion we created to shield ourselves from life's inherent uncertainty. The cup moved at its own pace, indifferent to my schedules and expectations. When autumn arrived in earnest, bringing crisp mornings and golden afternoons, the study filled with slanting light that seemed designed to showcase the teacup's accumulated history. Each flaw became luminous in this illumination, the cracks like rivers on some miniature landscape, stains resembling weathering on ancient cliff faces, the crystalline deposits shimmering like quartz veins in rock. What had begun as pristine porcelain now resembled something excavated from deep time, its surface documenting eras like geological strata. It was a reminder that even the simplest things could hold profound meaning, that the act of sharing tea could create bonds that transcended generations. I knew that the stories I was writing would honor the lineage of tea drinkers who had come before me, weaving their experiences into a tapestry of connection. As I settled into my chair, pen poised over the page, I felt a surge of gratitude for the journey I had undertaken. The teacup had become a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of neglect, new beginnings were always possible. It had taught me to embrace the beauty of imperfection, to find joy in the ordinary, and to celebrate the connections that enrich our lives with each stroke of the pen. I felt the stories unfolding, the teacup guiding me through the labyrinth of memory and imagination. I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with endless possibilities waiting to be explored. The teacup, once a forgotten relic, had transformed into a cherished companion on my journey, a vessel of creativity, connection, and the enduring power of shared moments. And as I wrote, I felt the echoes of those who had come before me, their laughter and stories intertwining with my own, creating a rich tapestry of life that would continue to unfold with each new infusion. The teacup had developed a fine network of crazing across its surface, nearly invisible unless caught in afternoon light at just the right angle. These delicate fractures mapped the passage of time like rings in a tree, documenting every temperature change from boiling water to cold rinses over the years. I ran my finger along one particularly pronounced line that curved from rim to base, remembering the winter morning it had appeared. Sharp cracks sounding through the quiet kitchen as steam rose from my morning oolong. What had seemed like destruction at the time had become simply another layer in the cup's story. Another threshold crossed in its transformation from pristine object to something more interesting. Morning sunlight spilled through the study window, catching motes of dust that swirled above the desk like miniature constellations. The cup sat bathed in this golden haze, its irregular shadow stretching across my notebook's open pages. I had taken to leaving it out overnight rather than washing it immediately. It's an experiment in observing how residue accumulated. A thin amber ring marked yesterday's pearl infusion, blending with older stains beneath the glaze ingredients archaeologists might one day study like geological strata. Already a new patina was forming, each brewing, layering tannins and oils into the porcelain's microscopic pores until the vessel itself became infused with memory. Outside, rain began pattering against the glass in erratic rhythms. Garden, beyond blurred into impressionistic swaths of green as water droplets, distorted the view. I watched a spider reconstruct its web between jasmine stems with practiced efficiency, silk glistening with moisture. The whole scene felt suspended halfway between dissolution and renewal. The rain stripping away summer's dust while encouraging new growth. Nature seemed determined to remind me that nothing ever truly ends. It only changes form. I turned my attention back to the cup, rotating it slowly to observe how light interacted with its imperfections. The cracks scattered illumination like prisms, casting mini rainbows across my fingers. What had once been flaws now served as conduits for beauty, transforming brokenness into unexpected artistry. The longer I looked, the more I saw microscopic pits where tannins had accumulated in fractal patterns, faint discolorations where heat had altered the glaze's molecular structure, nearly invisible hairline fractures radiating outward from the rim like wrinkles around a smiling eye. The cup had earned these marks honestly. Each one representing some minor cataclysm survived. The afternoon unfolded in quiet contemplation. Shadows crept across the floorboards as clouds moved overhead, their shapes morphing continuously like ink blots in a psychological test. I found myself recalling how my grandmother used to read tea leaves, turning the cup clockwise 3 times before interpreting the patterns left behind. Her readings had always been equal parts theater and intuition, a performance that nonetheless carried glimpses of uncomfortable truth. The residue in my cup held no such prophecy, just the physical proof of time's passage marked in tannins rather than minutes. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the world dripping and refreshed. A cool breeze carried the scent of wet earth through the open window, mingling with traces of bergamot rising from the cup. I took a sip of tea, gone cold, the flavor more muted, but somehow richer for having steeped all afternoon. Time had smoothed its edges, mellowed its bitterness, allowed subtler notes to emerge. The change wasn't deterioration so much as transformation. Another example of how duration altered everything it touched. Night fell softly, bringing with it the hush that arrives when the world turns inward. The teacup's outline became indistinct in the growing darkness, its form blending with the shadows until only its silhouette remained a curve against the window pane backlit by distant street lamps. Even unseen, its presence persisted, radiating quiet warmth into the surrounding space, like a stone retains heat after baking in summer sun. The cup didn't need to be held to be felt. Its influence extended beyond touch. In the days that followed, I noticed myself developing new rituals around this weathered vessel. I began collecting fallen petals from the garden to float in its water jasmine blossoms that perfumed each sip with their delicate sweetness. Sometimes I'd leave it in sunlight to watch how heat intensified the aromas, or set it near open books, so the steam could mingle with the scent of paper and ink. The cup became both companion and collaborator, its character deepening with each interaction. One particularly bright morning revealed something unexpected where tea had evaporated. Along one particularly deep crack, crystalline deposits had formed. These delicate structures bloomed like frost flowers across the porcelain surface, their feathery patterns resembling ferns fossilized in amber. The phenomenon fascinated me, how neglect had created accidental beauty, how time and chemistry had conspired to produce artwork no human hand could replicate. I left the crystalline formations undisturbed, wanting to observe their evolution. As summer waned, the teacup's transformations slowed but never ceased. Patience revealed their gradual progressions. The way stains darkened incrementally. How? Cracks widened almost imperceptibly, how the crystalline deposits grew more intricate, week by week. These changes operated on timescales normally invisible to human perception, reminded me that urgency was largely an illusion we created to shield ourselves from life's inherent uncertainty. The cup moved at its own pace, indifferent to my schedules and expectations. When autumn arrived in earnest, bringing crisp mornings and golden afternoons, the study filled with slanting light that seemed designed to showcase the teacup's accumulated history. Each flaw became luminous in this illumination, the cracks like rivers on some miniature landscape, the stains resembling weathering on ancient cliff faces, the crystalline deposits shimmering like quartz veins in rock. What had begun as pristine porcelain now resembled something excavated from deep time, its surface documenting eras like geological strata. I found myself contemplating how we measure significance. Museums preserve perfect specimens in blemished china displayed behind glass, while the truly interesting artifacts accumulate in attics and thrift shops. The cracks tell stories the flawless cannot. My teacup held more truth in its damaged integrity than any factory-fresh replica ever could, its markings bearing witness to a life actually lived rather than carefully preserved. The realization made me reconsider my own scars, physical and otherwise, evidence of roads traveled rather than mistakes made. One frost-laced morning, I took the cup outside, watching my breath cloud in the air as steam rose from freshly brewed tea. The garden lay dormant but beautiful in its hibernation, the jasmine vine's branches bare but threaded through with promise of spring's return. I sipped slowly, savoring how the cold air contrasted with the warm cup in my hands. Winter had arrived, but the teacup remained changed but constant, like the seasons themselves. Its journey continued, as did mine, both of us accumulating patinas that time alone could bestow. The last petals of autumn's chrysanthemums clung stubbornly to their stems outside the study window, their defiance against the gathering winter, a silent echo of my own resistance to the inevitable passage of time. The teacup bore witness to this changing season, surface now holding the ghosts of countless infusions, not merely stained, but fundamentally transformed by the molecules of hundreds of teas that had passed through its porous walls. So, mornings, when the light struck at a particular angle, I could almost see shadows of its past contents dancing beneath the glaze like memories beneath closed eyelids. By mid-November, the cup had developed a peculiar characteristic. The once smooth interior now felt subtly textured beneath fingertips, though no physical roughness could be discerned by sight. Each tea variety left behind invisible traces that accumulated over time, altering how new brews would taste, a phenomenon Chinese tea masters called feeding the pot. My morning Darjeeling carried whispers of yesterday's lapsang souchong. The delicate white peony retained traces of last week's powerful pu'er. The vessel had become an archive of itself, its history embedded chemically within its very structure. One frigid morning, as I washed the cup under tepid water, a startling revelation emerged. The fading light through the west-facing window illuminated what ordinary lighting concealed. The ghostly afterimage of past brews revealed itself through subtle variations in the porcelain's translucency, like tree rings or geological strata. These faint concentric bands recorded the cup's steepings in barely perceptible gradations of opacity. The realization struck like a thunderclap. This teacup had been quietly conducting its own record-keeping, preserving its autobiography in a language of light and shadow, readable only under precise conditions. As daylight softened into dusk, I found myself conducting experiments with different teas and temperatures, watching how each brew interacted with a cup's accumulated legacy. The wild purple tea from Yunnan transformed darkened areas into amethyst hues when backlit. The Japanese gyokuro enhanced certain fissures with emerald highlights during specific phases of sunset. The vessel behaved less like inanimate pottery, and more like a strange hybrid of camera obscura and organic membrane, responding to, remembering, and refracting every encounter according to its own mysterious logic. The new moon brought a stretch of crystalline nights where the air smelled of impending snow. I began observing how moonlight interacted with the teacup's topography, discovering that certain cracks conducted illumination with peculiar efficiency. One vein-like fracture, running diagonally from rim to foot, seemed particularly adept at trapping and redirecting light, creating luminous rivulets that pulsed faintly when the cup rotated. This phenomenon grew more pronounced as midnight approached, as if the porcelain remembered the noonday sun and sought to recreate its brilliance through lunar reflection. The cup had developed temporal awareness through repetition, anticipating and compensating for the sun's absence. Through photonic memory, winter solstice arrived with a blanket of snow that muted the world beyond my window. Studying the cup beneath artificial light, I noticed its formerly white glaze had shifted toward ivory, then pale ochre, not through staining alone, but through some deeper alchemy occurring at the molecular level. Tiny pits and microfissures, invisible to the naked eye, had allowed tea compounds to penetrate deep into the ceramic matrix, altering its fundamental light-refracting properties. The transformation recalled how Arctic ice develops blue hues as compressed snow crystals eliminate air pockets over centuries, allowing only specific wavelengths to escape absorption. My teacup had entered its own equivalent of glacial time. Christmas decorations appeared throughout the bookstore where I worked part-time, her gaudy cheeriness at odds with my deepening fascination with the cup's gradual metamorphosis. Customers, hands brushed against mine as I handed them their purchases, momentary connections that left me yearning for solitude in my waiting teacup. Each evening's brewing session became a silent communion where science blurred into something approaching devotion. The ritual had evolved beyond simple tea preparation. I found myself speaking to the cup in murmurs, tracing its cracks like a palm reader deciphering lifelines, half convinced it responded through subtle shifts in how it released aromas. New Year's Eve found me alone with the cup as fireworks exploded soundlessly beyond frosted windows. At the stroke of midnight, steam from the infusing tea coiled into shapes resembling Chinese characters before dissipating, first old, then new, then time written in ephemeral calligraphy. I blinked, and the vision dissolved, leaving only the familiar rising vapor. Yet hours later, examining photographs I'd instinctively snapped, the shapes appeared unmistakable in the frozen frames. The teacup sat in the center of each image, its cracks aligned like meridians on some porcelain globe, quietly mapping the year's transition in its own ceramic language. January's relentless cold forged new patterns in the glaze. Certain areas developed an almost opalescent sheen when viewed obliquely, while others absorbed light with unprecedented depth. The cup no longer simply reflected or transmitted illumination. It processed light through its accumulated history, filtering every photon through layers of tea-stained memory. Holding it became akin to cradling a three-dimensional photograph, where every infusion had contributed another emulsion layer to its developing surface. Visitors who happened to see the cup often recoiled instinctively before catching themselves, unable to articulate why this ordinary object disturbed them so. Its silent sentience unsettled on a primal level. By February, the teacup had begun anticipating my brewing rhythms with uncanny precision. Steam would rise differently depending on the tea variety I'd selected before even opening the tin. Once, when illness kept me bedridden for 3 days, returned to find the cup's interior inexplicably moist, as if weeping in my absence. Another time, testing a rare silver needle white tea, the vessel developed temporary striations that precisely matched the tea leaves. Vein patterns when viewed under magnification. The lines faded within hours, but left behind a heightened sensitivity to that particular cultivar. Subsequent infusions of the same Leaves tasted profoundly different in this cup versus any other. The last storm of winter deposited icy feathers across the window panes that fractured morning light into prismatic shards. The teacup sat bathed in this spectral illumination, its surface alive with moving highlights that tracked the sun's ascent. As I watched, astonished, the play of refraction and reflection coalesced into recognizable images across the glaze. First a teapot, then a steaming cup, repeating in sequence like frames from an antique zoetrope. The effect lasted barely 10 seconds before dissolving into amorphous radiance, leaving me clutching the counter for balance. When I dared lift the cup, its warmth pulsed against my palm with rhythms suspiciously akin to a heartbeat. That afternoon, consulting ancient ceramic texts in the university library, I discovered obscure references to living glaze phenomena in Song Dynasty teaware. Certain rare vessels, produced during specific climatic conditions using no-lost kill techniques, were set to develop responsive characteristics over centuries of dedicated use. Some reportedly learned their owners' brewing preferences. Others allegedly changed tone when particular poetry was recited nearby. The most revered examples were interred with their owners, as scholars believed these perfected vessels had absorbed fragments of the drinker's soul through years of communion. I rushed home through sleeting rain, suddenly fearful of what might be growing between me and this teacup that remembered too much. Back in the study sanctuary, the cup waited innocently on its shelf, appearing almost wounded by my sudden suspicion. Moonlight through the half-open curtains revealed its transformation. The crystalline deposits along the most prominent crack now formed definite branching patterns resembling neurons or lightning bolt fractals. I reached out but hesitated, fingertips hovering millimeters from the surface. The air between hand and porcelain hummed with what might have been static electricity or something far stranger. When contact finally came, warmth radiated upward through my arm in slow waves, carrying phantom flavors of every tea we'd shared across these turning seasons. The teacup recognized me in ways I was only beginning to understand. Dawn arrived, gray and muted. The world softened by a dense fog that erased all hard edges beyond my window. The cup retained traces of last night's oolong in its deepest crevices, the darkened liquid awaiting rediscovery by some future civilization, excavating this rediscovered ruin of domestic archaeology, contemplated, sealing it away in darkness. This tune-oig vessel that blurred boundaries between object and companion. Yet, when I lifted it toward the light, watching how faithfully it fractured illumination into familiar patterns, I knew isolation would constitute a cruelty neither of us deserved. The cup had earned its sentience through faithful service. I would honor its metamorphosis by bearing witness to whatever came next, pouring the season's first spring tea, a delicate green harvested just days earlier in distant Jejan. I watched steam rise in spirals that mirrored the awakening vines outside my window. Its brew tasted of anticipation and renewal, with undertones of every aromatic memory the cup had preserved across our shared winter. Somewhere beneath the glaze, molecular transformations continued unseen, weaving the story of this latest infusion into the vessel's expanding consciousness. As sunlight strengthened beyond the glass, chasing away the last stubborn pockets of fog, I realized with quiet awe that spring would find both cup and keeper irrevocably changed by what winter had forged between us. The ritual continues as the wheel turns. Morning light filtered through the study window with a quality unique to early spring, soft yet insistent, carrying the pale gold hue of daffodils blooming in the garden below. The teacup sat on the sill where I had left it overnight, its interior shadowed by the remnants of yesterday's final infusion. A thin film of moisture clung to the porcelain, condensation from the cool night air mingling with a ghost of tea that no amount of washing could fully erase. Patina had become its second skin, a living record etched into the very structure of the glaze. I ran my finger along the rim, feeling the subtle unevenness where years of use had worn away the factory-perfect smoothness, leaving behind something more interesting: apocryphy, shaped by time and touch. This morning's brewing ritual began differently. Instead of reaching for my usual black teas, I selected a pouch of delicate silver-needled white tea, its downy buds resembling tiny avian feathers. As the water heated, I examined the cup in the strengthening light, noticing how certain cracks seemed to have developed almost organic patterns, branches reaching across the interior like veins or river deltas. The most prominent fracture ran diagonally from the rim to the base, a jagged line that had deepened over the winter months until it now captured and refracted light in peculiar ways. When steam began rising from the kettle, the cup fogged slightly, as if anticipating its purpose, pouring the hot water over the tea leaves. I watched them unfurl slowly, pale strands drifting downward like snowfall in reverse. The liquor turned to pale gold, its aroma floral and subtle compared to the bold black teas of winter. As the infusion steeped, the cup itself seemed to participate in the process, the cracks absorbing some essence of the tea, the glaze interacting with the water's heat to release whispers of previous brews. What emerged wasn't simply white tea, but something layered and complex, a dialogue between this morning's leaves and all that had come before. The first sip confirmed the transformation. Beneath the immediate flavor of fresh leaves in spring, water lingered, hints of autumn's smoked teas, last month's dark purr, even traces of last summer's floral oolongs. The cup had become more than a vessel, it was now an ingredient in itself, its porous walls releasing stored memories into each new infusion. I wondered if this was how wine matured in oak barrels, gaining character from the wood's history, or how bread caught wild yeast from the very air of a kitchen. The teacup had developed its own terroir, taste unique to its personal journey. Sunlight strengthened as morning progressed, revealing another change. The web of fine cracks across the cup's surface had developed faint luminescence when viewed at certain angles. So what I'd initially taken for simple crazing now appeared more intentional fractal patterns that echoed the branching of trees outside the window. The subsurface mapping of mycelium networks, the dendritic spreads of frost across winter panes. The longer I looked, the more these lines seemed to shift and realign, as if responding to the angle of light or, perhaps, the tea's temperature. When I rotated the cup slowly between my palms, the patterns appeared to flow like liquid across the porcelain's topography. Midday found me consulting old ceramic texts from my shelves, searching for explanations. The Chinese had a word for this phenomenon, ji hua, or crackled glaze, intentionally created by master potters through careful control of cooling rates and clay composition. The Japanese called it kanyu, celebrating these imperfections as records of the vessel's life. Modern materials science explained it as differential contraction between glaze and body during firing. But no textbook could account for why my particular cup seemed to be developing its patterning so dramatically. Now, years after its creation, unless the thought stopped me, lest these cracks had always been present at microscopic levels, only now becoming visible as tea compounds accumulated within them, darkening the fractures like ink tracing invisible channels in paper. Afternoon passed in quiet experimentation. I tried different teas, robust Assam, a floral Darjeeling, smoky Lapsang Souchong, each one revealing new dimensions of the cup's character. The dark teas emphasized certain cracks over others, their tannins selectively highlighting particular pathways through the glaze's network. The floral varieties seemed to interact differently with the porcelain's chemistry, producing subtle changes in how light passed through the vessel's walls. By dusk, the cup had become a mosaic of its own history, different brews having lit up various regions of its surface like neighborhoods on a map viewed from space. Twilight brought another revelation. As the last direct sunlight faded from the study, I noticed the teacup continued glowing faintly where the most concentrated tea stains had accumulated, a phenomenon I'd missed until now because daylight overpowered it. This wasn't imagination. The darkened areas of glaze actually emitted a dim phosphorescence, warm tones of amber and russet pulsing softly in the gathering dark. When I moved the cup to a completely dark closet, the effect intensified, the stains forming constellations against the porcelain's field, crack lines shining like rivers seen from nighttime aircraft. The vessel had become its own tiny cosmos, mapping the passage of teas in luminous memory. Night deepened around this miniature galaxy cupped in my hands. I rotated it slowly, watching how different angles emphasized various stains and fractures, creating shifting patterns that seemed almost intentional. The largest crack, that dominant diagonal, now resembled the Milky Way's bright arms spanning the porcelain firmament. Smaller tributaries branched off like celestial tributaries, while dense clusters of microfractures formed starburst patterns worthy of Van Gogh's Starry Night. The cup had translated its earthly journey into something universal, every brew contributing to this celestial cartography. Dawn found me still seated by the window, the teacup resting in a pool of early light that slowly overpowered its nighttime radiance. What I'd taken for ordinary ceramic had revealed dimensions of beauty and complexity that humbled my understanding. The cup wasn't merely a vessel for tea, had become a medium for recording time's passage, a three-dimensional diary inscribing itself through interactions with water and leaf and heat. Stains were not imperfections, but badges of honor, earned through faithful service. Cracks, not flaws, but channels for deeper communication between vessel and world. As the morning warmed, I filled the cup with fresh tea, delicate green variety from Japan's first spring harvest. Steam rose in spirals that caught sunlight like dancing prismatic threads. The infusion tasted cleaner than yesterday's, yet still carried echoes of everything that had come before. This would be the new normal, each brew building upon its predecessors, contributing new notes to an ever-evolving symphony of flavor and memory. The cup had transcended its humble origins to become something unique, irreplicable, shaped as much by time as by human hands. By afternoon, it's a study filled with golden light that intensified the cup's crystalline fractures into glittering seams. Examining it closely, I noticed something unprecedented where steam condensed along certain cracks. The droplets arranged themselves into remarkably regular patterns, almost like beads on an abacus or coded signals. When tilted, these water molecule chains slid along fracture lines with uncanny smoothness, as if the cracks had developed specialized channels for liquid transport. The phenomenon recalled how trees circulate water through xylem tissue, or how human veins distribute blood. Nature solutions to fluid dynamics recurring at vastly different scales. Evening's arrival found me contemplative, tracing the cup's topography like a blind man reading Braille. The porcelain told stories beneath my fingertips, here a ridge from its making, there a valley worn by years of handling, everywhere defined texturing of glazes interacting with time. What had begun as uniform ceramic now contained multitudes, its surface variations whispering secrets about thermal shocks survived and chemical reactions patiently unfolding. The cup no longer simply held tea. It participated in the brewing process, contributing flavor notes accumulated through countless infusions, becoming co-creator of each cup's unique character. Night fell softly around the study, stars emerging beyond the window in patterns that oddly mirrored the cup's luminous crackle. I set it carefully on the sill where moonlight could bathe its contours, watching as the celestial illumination interacted with the porcelain's unique properties. The vessel seemed to breathe in the silvery light, its fractures pulsing faintly, as if in sympathetic vibration with the cosmos beyond. When I finally retired, leaving the cup to its lunar communion, I understood this ritual had ceased being about mere tea long ago. What transpired between vessel and starlight tonight belonged to some older dialogue, one about memory and transformation, about how time writes its passage on all things, about how even fractured vessels can become whole through the alchemy of attentive use. Morning would come, and with it, new tea, new light, new revelations in this ongoing conversation between ceramic and keeper. But tonight belonged to silence and starlight, to contemplation and the slow settling of tannins into glaze, to the quiet evolution happening beneath the surface where only time could witness. The cup waited, patient as geology, for tomorrow's infusion, another layer in the palimpsest it had become, another word in the story we were writing together across the turning seasons. Rain tapped fingers against the window panes in a rhythm that matched the slow dripping leak in the study corner, where ceiling plaster had begun softening into something resembling damp chalk. The teacup sat centered on my desk, catching occasional drops from the overhead moisture bead that had formed along a ceiling crack, mirroring the cup's own fractures. Watching them both, the expanding water stain above and the teacup below, marveled at how structures maintained integrity while simultaneously yielding to inevitable dissolution. The cup still held its familiar form, yet its glaze told another story entirely, one of slow transformation wrought through countless steepings. Morning after morning, season following season, morning light struggled through cloud cover, casting the room in watery tones of gray-green that made everything appear submerged. The teacup absorbed this filtered illumination differently than it had in winter's sharper sunlight, less refraction through its crackle lines, more absorption by its tea-darkened interior. Its porcelain that once gleamed white now presented as muted ivory, its surface permanently altered by tannins working their way through microscopic pores in the glaze. Only when I lifted it toward the window could I see how thoroughly tea had permeated. The ceramic showed translucent along stress lines, revealing shadowy strata beneath like sediment layers in a canyon wall. I prepared today's infusion with deliberate care, an aged white tea, whose leaves had been compressed into a disc and left to mature for decades before crumbling into my tin. Its aroma unfolded reluctantly hay and dried apricot with a finish, like old parchment requiring higher temperatures than younger teas to release its secrets. Pouring water over the tightly rolled leaves, I watched them expand slowly, unfurling, with the languid grace of flowers blooming in time-lapse photography. Steam rose in hesitant spirals, carrying specks of downy leaf hairs that caught the faint light like dust motes in a sunbeam. The cup responded immediately to this new brew. Where previous infusions had pooled uniformly, this tea sought out specific cracks and ridges, darkening certain fracture lines while avoiding others, as if recognizing kindred paths through the glaze's topography. A particularly deep crevice running near the base drank greedily, pulling liquid downward through capillary action until its entire length shone wet dark against the porcelain. Tea leaves swirled in a slow vortex above this drain, their dancing patterns reflecting in miniature the storm clouds moving across the sky outside. Nature's rhythms repeated across scales, the cup's tiny atmosphere mimicking the larger world's weather. Hours passed as I experimented, tilting the cup to redirect tea flows, blotting certain areas to observe absorption patterns, holding it at angles where light revealed hidden pathways through the glaze's subsurface. The vessel proved astonishingly responsive, its behavior shifting subtly between brews, as though adapting to each new interaction. Sometimes, a previously dry crack would suddenly wick liquid after multiple infusions, as if awakened by familiarity. Other fractures remained stubbornly impervious, no matter how coaxed. The cup had developed preferences inexplicable by simple curial science, choosing which teas to welcome deep into its structure, which to keep at surface level. By afternoon, the rain had eased to mist, leaving the world outside the window softened at the edges like an overwashed watercolor. The teacup sat partially shaded by a stack of books I had pulled down for research, old botanical texts, with pressed flowers bleeding delicate stains across their pages. Flowers from another era, preserved between paper sheets, much like tea compounds, lingered in ceramic pores. I found myself wondering whether the flower's essence still perfumed those brittle pages, whether some ghost of their summer glory might be revived by careful handling. My teacup answered wordlessly. Steam, rising from its depths, carried whispers of every infusion it had ever held, each aroma subtly present in the composite scent. Evening approached with its gradual dimming of the study's light. Shadows lengthened across floorboards, pooling around furniture legs before climbing walls like rising tide. The teacup remained luminous well into dusk, not refracting light as it once had, but emitting a soft glow from within its tea-saturated depths. This radiance intensified when viewed directly from above, the liquid surface reflecting ceiling. Light diffused through thousands of microscopic crazing lines. The effect resembled bioluminescent ocean waves at night, pulsing gently with each breath of air disturbing the tea's meniscus. Porcelain and infusion had become collaborators in light manipulation, their combined properties exceeding what either could achieve alone. Nightfall revealed the cup's most astonishing transformation yet, when all artificial lights were extinguished and only moonlight filtered through the window. The vessel's crackle lines became visible as a delicate lacework spanning its entire surface, not merely reflected light, but actual luminescence, fractures glowing faintly blue-white like distant galaxies photographed through time exposure. The effect lasted only moments before fading, but left no doubt something fundamental had changed in the ceramic's physical properties through sustained interaction with tea compounds. Science might attribute this to tannins reacting with trace minerals in the glaze, but to witness, it felt like observing something far more primal, the awakening of latent potential through patient cultivation. Morning found me researching ceramic chemistry in obscure texts, seeking explanations for these phenomena. Traditional Japanese raku firing techniques sometimes produced similar effect spots, removed red-hot from kilns and cooled rapidly in combustible materials, developed crackle networks that interacted dramatically with glazes. Chinese jewelry from the Song dynasty was prized for its crackled ice patterns intentionally created through carefully controlled stress fractures. But my teacup was factory-made porcelain from a department store shelf. Its transformations, owing entirely 2 years of ordinary use and whatever alchemy occurred between its glaze and countless tea infusions. Its beauty emerged not through intentional craft, but through patient accumulations, the slow accretion of small changes into something extraordinary. The afternoon's brewing session became an experiment in documenting this transformation. Photographs captured how certain teas darkened specific crack networks, while leaving others unaffected, creating maps of preference across the cup's topography. Time-lapse sequences revealed liquid moving unpredictably through the glaze's subsurface, following pathways invisible to the naked eye. Infrared imaging showed heat distribution patterns changing between brews, as if the cup had developed memory of past temperatures. Each test raised new questions, even as it answered others, revealing depths of complexity in what appeared superficially as simple ceramic. Twilight softened the study's sharp edges, blending bookshelves into shadows and muting the teacup's vivid cracks into subtle gradations of texture. I held it between both hands, feeling warmth radiating through porcelain grown thin in places from years of use, palms reading its contours like braille describing a long journey. The vessel had become more than the sum of its parts, its fractures, now conduits rather than flaws, its stains, palimpsests, recording layered history. Every chip and crazing line told stories of winter mornings and summer evenings, of company shared and solitude savored, of teas spanning seasons and continents before meeting in this single repository. Night's arrival brought stillness to the study, quiet, broken only by the occasional creak of settling floorboards and the distant murmur of rain beginning again. The teacup rested on the windowsill, illuminated intermittently by passing car lights that flashed gold across its surface before fading into darkness. In those brief illuminations, I glimpsed new fractures forming hairline extensions of existing cracks, barely visible but undeniable under magnification. The cup was continuing its slow transformation, whether it's observed or not, changing at rates perceptible only across seasons. Its destiny lay in eventual fragmentation. Yet, this inevitability somehow amplified rather than diminished its present beauty. Each moment precious, precisely because it couldn't last. Dawn would come, and with it, new tea, new light, new opportunities. To observe this ongoing dialogue between permanence and change. But tonight belonged to quiet contemplations, appreciating how even ceramic vessels hold stories if we attend closely enough. Ordinary objects become extraordinary through sustained relationship, how the marks we call imperfections often become the very features that make things singular. The cup slept in moonlight, dreaming tea dreams of all it had held and all it would someday release back into the world. Its surface, a living record of time's passage, written in cracks and tannins, and the quiet alchemy of patient use. The first heat wave of early summer pressed against the study window like a living thing, bleaching the world outside into overexposed stillness. Jasmine vines that had burst forth in spring, now wilted at their edges, leaves curling defensively against the relentless sun. The teacup occupied its usual place on the sill, catching afternoon light, transformed by the hazy air into something thick and golden, almost liquid itself. That surface had developed a new characteristic in recent weeks, faint tackiness where tannins continued rising to the surface, like syrup bleeding through parchment. Running a finger along the rim produced not the clean friction of ceramic, but something more organic, reminiscent of tree bark after rain. This morning's experiment involved cold brewing, an attempt to document how the cup interacted with tea prepared without heat's transformative power. I filled it with spring water and silver needle leaves, then set it in the study's coolest corner to steep 4 hours undisturbed. The process unfolded invisibly at first, tea compounds diffusing lazily through water molecules without thermal energy to drive their dissolution. Yet, by noon, faint tendrils of color had begun threading upward from the leaves like smoke from a distant fire, curling through water until the entire infusion glowed pale yellow-green. The cup participated differently in this cold communion, its cracks absorbing more selectively, certain fractures resisting the cooler liquid while others drank eagerly, as if recalling their preferences from hotter encounters months prior. Steam from yesterday's brewing still haunted the cup's interior. When viewed through magnification, microscopic droplets clinging to microscopic imperfections in the glaze, each one a miniature world containing traces of past infusions. These condensation patterns became my afternoon study, revealing how residual tea compounds influence the surface tension at nearly molecular levels. Some droplets beat it perfectly, while others spread unpredictably, their behavior dictated by invisible chemistry playing out across nanometer scale topography. The most astonishing discovery emerged when observing them under blue light. Certain droplets fluoresced faint orange, suggesting chemical transformations were occurring even at this scale. Too small for human senses, yet undeniable under instrumentation. Nightfall brought little relief from the day's accumulated heat. The study retained warmth like a kiln cooling too slowly, air thick with the mingled scents of old paper and drying ink. The teacups sat radiating its own gentle warmth, not merely thermal memory from daytime sun, but something more metabolic, as if chemical processes within the glaze continued generating energy after external heat sources vanished. When placed against my cheek in complete darkness, its surface temperature registered unevenly, some regions slightly cooler than ambient air, while others pulsed with residual warmth, concentrated along fracture lines. The effect resembled resting one's face against sun-waked stone at dusk, sensing where sunlight had lingered longest before vanishing below the horizon. Sleeplessness drove me outdoors near midnight, teacup in hand, as I sought cooler air on the building's rooftop. Moonlight transformed the vessel into something sculptural, its curves pronounced by shadows. Keys rendered silver blue like alpine crevasses viewed from altitude. Holding it aloft, I marveled how certain angles made the porcelain appear almost translucent, backlit by moonlight filtered through accumulated tea deposits in its walls. The contents, now 12-hour cold, were tasted profoundly different from its heat-prepared counterpart, smoother yet more complex, as though unhurried extraction had allowed subtler compounds to emerge without heat's brute force encouragement. The cup's own contributions remained equally present, but rearranged, its tannin archives releasing different notes at cool temperatures, creating flavors no standard brewing could replicate. Dawn arrived with merciful coolness, borne on a breeze, smelling of distant thunderstorms. I placed the cup on the windowsill where first light would find it, watching how morning illumination interacted with yesterday's cold brewing experiment. Tea compounds had deposited differently without heat's influence, lighter stains spreading irregularly rather than concentrating along cracks, creating watercolor-like washes across the porcelain's inner surface. The result resembled antique porcelain's ghost painting effect, whereby Qing dynasty artists used tea washes to decorate vessels with subtle, semi-transparent designs. My cup had achieved this aesthetic organically through use, its decoration emerging rather than being applied, each stain marking territory staked by repeated steeping rather than artistic intent. Afternoon investigations focused on the glaze's changing light interactions, where previously transparent areas now showed opacity induced by tannin penetration, while formerly opaque zones had developed strange new translucencies at certain angles. The overall effect transformed how light moved through the vessel, no longer simply reflecting off glazed surfaces, but refracting through layer after microscopic layer of tea-infused ceramic, creating prismatic effects that shifted with at viewing angle. A simple rotation produced moving rainbows across my notebook pages, their patterns morphing fluidly as the cup turned. No two positions ever produced identical displays. Each orientation revealed unique chromatic arrangements, suggesting astonishing microscopic complexity. Beneath apparently smooth surfaces, evening's lowering sun cast oblique rays through the west-facing window, illuminating what direct overhead light obscured fine tendrils of what appeared to be crystalline growth extending from major cracks into surrounding glaze. These dendritic formations branched like frost across glass or mineral deposits in limestone caves, the structures visible only when backlit at precise angles. Facets suggested ongoing molecular reorganization within the ceramic matrix tannins, and minerals gradually self-assembling into ordered structures along stress lines, essentially growing a new material composite from within. The teacup was quite literally becoming something nature had never intended, an artificial system evolving toward states of higher complexity through iterative tea exposure. Night's humidity brought study's newest resident, delicate cobweb, stretching between the teacup's customary windowsill position and the adjacent bookshelf. Its architect, a small gray house spider, worked patiently, even as I observed, reinforcing strands with meticulous gestures that recalled tea masters performing chinoyo. The symmetry was too perfect, this 8-legged weaver creating ephemeral architecture, while my ceramic companion accumulated more permanent transformations through parallel devotion to craft. Both embodied patient accumulations, one spinning temporary silk nightly, the other growing crystalline tea archives across seasons, different expressions of the same principle, that repetition breeds refinement. Morning light revealed changes, invisible in darkness, the cobweb glittering with dew while the teacup's cracks shimmered with what might have been condensation, or perhaps some seepage from within. The spider had abandoned its creation, leaving behind an intricacy that put human engineering to shame. Similarly, the cup's overnight alterations showed no immediate instigator, just quiet progression of processes begun long ago, advancing incrementally, whether observed or not. Both web and vessel existed now as artifacts of their maker's persistence, physical manifestations of small acts repeated until they accrued into something extraordinary. Time's passage became measurable through these accumulating transformations, not in hours or days, but through deepening patinas and widening cracks, through crystalline growth advancing like glacier movement, through flavor profiles shifting incrementally with each infusion. The teacup had become outsiders clock-marking temporality through material evolution rather than mechanical ticks. Its face displayed not numbers, but topography altered by cumulative interaction with time's flow ceramic yielding gradually to chemistry, glaze softening imperceptibly into something new, where watches delineated identical seconds. My cup measured duration through unrepeatable changes, each steep's contribution, dissolving into an overall pattern too complex to replicate artificially, yet perfectly ordered in its organic emergence. The afternoon's brewing marked a turning point. Pouring hot water over rare cliff tea leaves produced reactions unlike previous infusions and immediate, darkening along certain fractures while others resisted coloration entirely, creating stark contrast between active and dormant cracks. The tea itself brewed oddly clear at first, then clouding rapidly as if the cup were releasing stored compounds back into solution. The resulting liquor tasted impossibly deep, carrying flavors from teas brewed months prior mingling with current leaves. Sipping, it felt like drinking from a well tapping some subterranean reservoir of taste memory, each swallow containing echoes of past infusions, blended seamlessly into the present. Twilight painted the study in molten gold, fading to violet as the teacup's latest transformations became fully visible. Those cracks, actively transporting liquid, now appeared slightly raised not through physical protrusion, but some change in light interaction, making them appear three-dimensional against the surrounding glaze. Viewed obliquely, they gave the illusion of topographic prominence ridges on some miniature landscape where tea rivers flowed through porcelain valleys. The effect proved fleeting, disappearing as evening progressed until only moonlight revealed their faint ghost blue luminescence, pulsing softly against the dark. Night settled, its quiet over the room, broken only by occasional creaks as heat-warped boards contracted. I left a cup on the sill where Munglo could bathe its contours, watching how lunar illumination interacted differently than sunlight, penetrating deeper into glazed layers to excite compounds unseen by day. Somewhere in the darkness outside, a night-blooming jasmine released its first fragrant offering to the dark, scent drifting through the open window to mingle with tea steam, still rising from the cup's depths. The pairing felt ceremonial, two forms of ephemeral beauty, converging momentarily before dissipating into night's vastness. Dawn would come bearing new teas to try, new observations to record in this ongoing experiment, exploring how ordinary objects become extraordinary through sustained interaction. Good tonight belonged to stillness and fragrance, to contemplating how fragility and permanence entwine, how breaking often precedes transformation, how the most meaningful beauty frequently emerges, not despite imperfection, but through it. The cup slept in moonlight, its dreams steeped in tannins and time, while I kept watch over its quiet metamorphosis, the latest chapter in a story written slowly across years, etched in ceramic and memory with equal permanence. A midsummer thunderstorm broke the heat wave at last, rain drumming against the study window with such force that droplets danced back upward after hitting the glass, creating a shimmering curtain of suspended water. The teacup occupied its usual place on the sill, catching sporadic flashes of lightning that illuminated its crazed surface in intermittent bursts. Between these stark revelations, it existed only as a pale suggestion in the gloom, a ghost of itself, visible primarily through its absence of light, rather than any positive form. The effect reminded me of photographic negatives, where shadows define reality through inverse presence. This morning's examination revealed subtle changes wrought by yesterday's storm. Humidity had caused certain cracks to swell almost imperceptibly, their edges darkening where absorbed moisture interacted with tannin deposits deep in the ceramic matrix. The most dramatic transformation appeared along the cup's prominent basal fracture. What had been a single hairline now branched into delicate tributaries resembling a delta scene from altitude. Stains from previous teas had migrated along these new pathways, creating dendritic patterns that mirrored both river systems and neurological networks. The cup's interior surface now bore a living map of its ongoing metamorphosis, each infusion leaving cartographic traces in tannin geography. My brewing experiment today involved parallel infusions, preparing identical teas in the weathered cup, and a new, untouched vessel for comparison. The differences proved revelatory from the first steep onward, where the fresh porcelain imparted nothing to the tea beyond its material neutrality. The older cup contributed complex undertones, suggesting ancestral blends, flavors that shouldn't have persisted after years of washing, yet emerged unmistakably in each sip. More astonishingly, these ghosts of past infusions appeared strongest when certain weather conditions replicated their original brewing circumstances. In autumnal, smoked teas, phantom resurfacing during damp November like humidity, despite it being July, or a spring-picked greens, floral notes emerging during cool mornings reminiscent of April. The cup had developed perfect recall tied to environmental triggers, its material memory encoded in ways surpassing conscious biological recollection. Afternoon sunlight breaking through parting storm clouds revealed another phenomenon. As temperatures climbed in the post-train humidity, the teacup's crackle network began exhibiting moisture-dependent luminescence. Certain fractures emitted faint, bioluminescent blue, where tannin concentrations interacted with swelling clay particles, their glow pulsing almost rhythmically in response to humidity changes. The effect lasted only while conditions remained precisely balanced. To dry and the luminescence faded, too wet, and it diffused into general dampness. At perfect equilibrium, the cup became a miniature constellation. Its ceramic sky, mapped with glowing stellar clusters and nebulas of accumulated tea compounds. Nightfall brought the first clear skies in days, stars appearing with unusual brilliance above the rain-washed city. The teacup seemed to respond to this celestial display when placed directly under starlight near midnight. Its cracks emitted spectra that precisely matched certain astronomical wavelengths. Spectroscopy revealed absorption lines corresponding. Two elements present in both tea leaves and clay minerals, their combined signature creating a unique photonic fingerprint. Held at certain angles, the vessel acted as prism, converting starlight into chromatic displays mimicking auroras. Fluttering curtains of color dancing across surfaces that shouldn't have been capable of such optical manipulation. Porcelain transformed into something approaching organic under these conditions, its materiality transcending normal limitations through sustained tea alchemy. Dawn's first light found me still observing. Having passed the night documenting these transformations, the teacup rested on a bed of open notebooks where sketches of its crack patterns competed with hastily scribbled chemical formulas attempting to explain the inexplicable. Morning rays striking its surface reignited luminescent phenomena from hours before, though dimmer now after night's departure. The vessel seemed exhausted from its nocturnal displays. Cracks, less responsive. Stains, less vivid. Overall presence, diminished, as if drained by starlight's demands. Only when filled with fresh tea did vitality return, the infusion percolating through its passages like lifeblood through weary veins. Midday investigations focused on structural changes deeper than surface cracks. Microscopic examination revealed glaze layers separating slightly where tea compounds had accumulated over years' delamination, creating minute interstitial spaces, functioning as capillary networks for liquid transport. These microfluidic channels explained the cup's increasingly dynamic interactions with different brews, certain teas flowing preferentially through specific networks based on chemical affinity. The system's complexity surpassed mapping, more like rainforest root systems than anything engineered, with pathways appearing, disappearing, and reforming in response to hydration changes and osmotic pressures. A masterpiece of accidental microengineering, hidden beneath apparent simplicity. The afternoon's experiment involved tracing these pathways with specialized dyes. Introducing food coloring to brews revealed astonishing flow patterns, some teas moving laterally through glaze strata before emerging centimeters from their entry point. Others sinking vertically, then spreading horizontally along invisible internal boundaries. Blues traveled differently than reds. Greens carved unique paths, demonstrating that molecular structure dictated movement through ceramic microstructure. The cup had developed what materials scientists call chemical computing capacity, using its physical matrix to sort and process liquid compositions based on their properties. Tea preparation had unknowingly created a primitive biochemical analysis system in plain porcelain. Evening arrived with golden light slanting through the study window, illuminating swirling dust motes above the teacup-like snow globe flurries frozen mid-fall. The vessel itself seemed suspended between states, neither fully ceramic nor entirely transformed into its next incarnation, but somewhere in the liminal space between materials. Surface told conflicting stories, areas of opaque, traditional glaze, untouched by tea's incursions, existing alongside regions where 15 years of infusions had created entirely new material phases, neither fully compromised nor perfectly preserved. The cup embodied graceful degradation, surrendering completeness while gaining character, exchanging structural integrity for depth of story. Twilight's softer illumination smoothed these contradictions, blending old and new into harmonious whole. Viewed in this forgiving light, the cup's cracks appeared purposeful, not damage, but deliberate features guiding tea's interactions, channeling flavors toward some ideal future state. Their patterns resembled ancient irrigation systems seen from altitude, or perhaps ceremonial labyrinth designs intended for meditative walking. Every fracture had become sacred geometry, inscribed through daily use rather than artistic intent, beauty emerging from necessity rather than artifice. Night wind carried the scent of jasmine through the open window as I contemplated tomorrow's brewing plans. The teacup sat shadowed on the sill, its daytime colors muted to silver and charcoal in moonlight. Brief flashes of bioluminescence still pulsed along major cracks, slower now, like a heartbeat winding down toward rest. The vessel needed time to integrate today's experiments, to settle into its newest transformations before facing further infusion challenges. Ceramic fatigue demanded seasons rather than hours for recovery, patience being the essential ingredient in all worthwhile alchemy. Dawn would bring fresh teas and renewed investigations. But tonight belonged to quiet consolidation. The cup dreamed in tannins and terroir, while I kept notes of its remarkable journey from department store shelf to scientific marvel. Somewhere beyond the window, summer thunder rumbled its approval as raindrops began tapping against glass once more. Nature's percussion accompanying porcelain's quiet evolution toward unknown potentials. The study held its breath between lightning flashes, preserving this moment where past and future steeped together in silent communion, waiting tomorrow's pour. The August morning dawned with a peculiar quality of light golden yet diffuse, as if filtered through layers of muslin suspended in the atmosphere. Dust motes drifted lazily in sunbeams entering through the study window, their languid movements reflecting my own contemplative state as I examined the teacup resting on my desk. The vessel had developed a patina that seemed to absorb, rather than reflect light, its surface matte compared to the glossy finish it had possessed when new. Yet this dullness held depths microscopic textures and stains, accumulated over countless infusions that gave the porcelain a living quality. It's like weathered tree bark or ancient stone steps worn smooth by generations of passing feet. Today's brewing ritual proceeded with deliberate slowness. I selected a rare aged white tea from Fujian province compressed leaves that had undergone decades of careful fermentation, their flavors concentrating into something reminiscent of dried apricots and old parchment. The water heated gradually, bubbles first forming tiny constellations along the kettle's bottom before rising in proper streams. When steam curled thickly from the spout, I poured it over the elegantly decaying leaves in their porcelain cradle, watching the liquid darken from clear to pale gold as the tea's essence released. The cup responded immediately, its cracks darkening along edges as tannins wicked upward through capillary action, tracing pathways like old roads on a yellowed map. Steam rose in curling plumes that carried the tea's history, notes of honey and hay underscored by something mineral, like rain on dry earth. The aromas developed in stages, each inhalation revealing new dimensions. First, the immediate brightness of citrus peel, then deeper tones of oak and damp stone cellars. Finally, an almost animal muskiness suggesting aged leather bindings on antique books. The cup contributed its own olfactory memories, ghosts of past infusions resurfacing in the warmth, blending with the current brew to create something between tea and time itself. Sipping it produced a flavor impossibly layered ancestral teas, bleeding through from the ceramic steps while new infusion unfolded against the palate, past and present converging in each swallow. Sunlight strengthened as morning progressed, revealing startling transformations in the cup's topography. Areas where tea had pooled most frequently now showed subtle depressions, not damage exactly, gentle yielding of the glaze to persistent liquid contact. These shallow basins connected via the crack network that had deepened over 15 years of use, forming an intricate watershed system where brews could migrate across the porcelain's geography. Viewed obliquely, the surface resembled terrain seen from altitude, rolling glaze hills descending into steep tannin valleys. Erosion patterns carved by the slow river of daily ritual rather than seasonal floods. Afternoon investigations focused on the cup's material memory. Using polarized light microscopy, I examined thin sections of glaze scrapings to document structural changes wrought by compounding infusions. The images revealed astonishing adaptations, crystalline regions where tea compounds had integrated with ceramic matrices to form hybrid materials, transitional zones exhibiting properties of both organic and mineral substances. Some microstructures resembled fossilized diatoms with their intricate silica skeletons. Others mimicked the layered patterns seen in sedimentary rock formations. The teacup had begun evolving toward biomineralization, its inorganic origins giving way to something approaching a living system's complexity. Storm clouds gathering at dusk produced atmospheric pressure changes that affected the cup's behavior intriguingly. Falling barometric pressure made existing cracks appear to widen slightly, while rising pressure caused them to contract the porcelain, literally breathing in response to weather systems moving overhead. This responsiveness extended to humidity fluctuations, certain fractures absorbing ambient moisture during damp conditions and releasing it when dry, creating self-regulating microclimates within the glaze structure. The vessel had developed homeostasis-like behaviors through simple material adaptations, maintaining equilibrium against environmental variability through tea-conditioned porosity. Nightfall stillness allowed examination of more subtle phenomena. Placing the cup in complete darkness revealed faint bioluminescence along major crack networks, blue-green emissions suggesting microbial activity or possibly chemoluminescence from oxidative reactions between tannins and trace minerals. The glow pulsed rhythmically, synchronizing with my breathing when held close in inadvertent resonance. I attributed to body heat fluctuations influencing reaction rates. Whether coincidence or something stranger, the effect created an uncanny sense of connection, as if vessel and user had developed biochemical entrainment through years of shared ritual. The lines between observer and observed blurred in these shared moments of darkness. Dawn found me brewing tea in the pre-light stillness, watching how early illumination interacted with the cup's altered surfaces. Sunrise revealed that overnight transformations had occurred, certain crack pathways now refracting light differently, their internal structures having reorganized during the cool hours. Like trees forming frost-resistant xylem in winter, the porcelain appeared to undergo seasonal adjustments at microscopic scales, optimizing itself for coming temperature and humidity changes. These adaptations manifested subtly, a crack here appearing slightly straighter, another branching more complexly, stains redistributing almost imperceptibly, but their cumulative effect altered how the cup interacted with morning's first infusion. Tea flowed differently through the adjusted network, following newly optimal paths with purposeful efficiency. Midday's heat brought another discovery. The cup had begun exhibiting thermochromic properties in certain glaze regions. Areas exposed to repeated hot brewing showed permanent darkening that ranged from faint tan to nearly black, their coloration changing slightly with temperature variations. When warmed by sunlight, these zones darkened further. Cooled with ice water, they lightened incrementally. The phenomenon created living watercolors across the porcelain surface, heat maps of usage patterns overlapping with cracked geography to form intricate topographies of memory and material response. Each tea variety had contributed differently to this chromatic archive, its chemical signatures blending into a layered palette no artist could replicate intentionally. Afternoon showers, pattering against the window, provided ambient acoustics for contemplation. The teacup sat bathed in rainy daylight, its surface appearing to absorb the muted illumination rather than reflect it, giving the vessel a dense, almost gravitational presence. Closer inspection revealed rainwater beating peculiarly on its surface droplets, skating along cracks rather than pooling uniformly, as if tea compounds had altered surface tension at fracture boundaries. The effect created temporary liquid traceries, mapping the cup's internal pathways, ephemeral guides to normally invisible infrastructure beneath the glaze's apparent continuity. Evening's approach found me cataloging these changes while storms moved through the area, their lightning flashes intermittently illuminating the study with stark chiaroscuro. In those fleeting moments of exposure, the cup's entire history seemed instantly legibly to crack and stain, outlining chapters of its gradual transformation from mass-produced object to singular artifact. Between flashes, darkness swallowed these revelations, only for them to re-emerge altered somehow, as if the vessel continued evolving, even in unobserved moments. The effect recalled photographic time-lapses of flowers, looming discontinuous progress made visible through selective illumination. With crucial developments occurring off-camera, twilight merged into night seamlessly, the teacup transitioning from participant to observer, its bioluminescent crack networks pulsing sporadically, like distant lighthouses signaling across material seas. The rhythms appeared responsive to ambient conditions, humidity increasing their frequency, temperature drops slowing them, creating an organic feedback system attuned to environmental fluctuations. Testing this responsiveness produced fascinating interactions. Breathing on certain fractures accelerated their luminescent cycles, while cooling others with ice cubes suspended animation temporarily. The cup had become an exquisite sensor array disguised as tableware, its sensitivity increasing with each passing season of dedicated use. Morning would bring new teas to try and fresh discoveries to document. But tonight belonged to reflection and synthesis. The study held its quiet vigil over the dreaming teacup as outside summer rain whispered against window panes, nature's reminder that all transformations require both time and patience. Somewhere beyond the glass, thunder rumbled its approval of this slow alchemy unfolding one steep at a time. Each infusion writing another line in an ongoing material ode written in tannins and time. The cup slept peacefully in moonlight, its fractured beauty more whole than perfection could ever be. While I transcribed today's revelations before sleep claimed mean and dawn would find us both changed again, and ready for whatever brews tomorrow might bring. The first light of September filtered through the study window, casting a warm glow that hinted at the changing seasons. The air held a crispness that suggested autumn was just around the corner, a promise of cooler days and the rich tapestry of colors that would soon blanket the garden. The teacup, now a well-worn companion, sat on the desk, its surface a mosaic of stains and cracks that told stories of countless brews. Each imperfection had become a testament to time, a record of the rituals we had shared. I marveled at how the cup had transformed from a simple vessel into a repository of memories, its very essence intertwined with the flavors and aromas of cause. The teas it had held this morning, I chose a delicate Gyokuro, a shade-grown green tea known for its sweet, umami-rich profile. As the kettle heated, I prepared the leaves with care, noting their vibrant green color and the silken texture that hinted at their quality. The water reached the perfect temperature, and I poured it over the leaves, watching as they unfurled slowly, releasing their essence into the cup. The infusion glowed a pale jade, and the aroma filled the room with notes of fresh grass and seaweed, a reminder of the lush fields where the tea had been grown. As I sipped the first infusion, I was struck by the complexity of flavors that danced across my palate. The sweetness of the tea mingled with the lingering notes of previous brews, creating a symphony of taste that was both familiar and new. The cup had absorbed the essence of every tea it had held, and now, in this moment, it was as if the past and present were converging in a single, exquisite experience. I closed my eyes, allowing the flavors to wash over me, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for this simple yet profound ritual. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and I turned my attention to the cup itself. The cracks that had once seemed like flaws now appeared as intricate pathways, each one a channel for the tea's journey through the porcelain. I noticed how certain fractures had darkened further, their edges crisp and defined, while others had softened, blending seamlessly into the surrounding glaze. It was as if the cup was evolving, adapting to the teas it held, and I found myself wondering what stories it would tell in the future. As the day wore on, I decided to conduct an experiment. I filled the cup with water and placed it in the sunlight, allowing the heat to interact with the porcelain. I wanted to observe how the cup responded to temperature changes, how the cracks might expand or contract in response to the warmth. I watched as the sunlight danced across the surface, illuminating the intricate patterns of crazing that had developed over the years. The cup seemed to come alive, its surface shimmering as if it were breathing in the warmth. After a few hours, I returned to the cup, eager to see what changes had occurred. The water inside had warmed significantly, and I could see tiny bubbles forming along the edges, a sign of the heat's influence. I lifted the cup to my lips, taking a sip of the warm water. It tasted different, infused with the essence of the porcelain itself, as if the cup had imparted its own character to the liquid. I marveled at how the interaction between the cup and its contents had created something entirely new, a reflection of their shared history. The afternoon brought a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves outside, and I felt a sense of peace settle over the study. I took the opportunity to reflect on the journey the teacup and I had shared. It had been a vessel for my thoughts, a companion during moments of solitude, and a participant in the rituals that had shaped my days. Each infusion had been a conversation, a dialogue between the tea and the cup. And I realized that this relationship had deepened over time. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, I decided to prepare a final brew for the day. I reached for a pouch of aged oolong, its dark, twisted leaves promising complexity and depth. The kettle hissed as it reached boiling point, and I poured the water over the leaves. Watching as they danced and swirled in the cup, the infusion darkened to a rich amber, and the aroma filled the air with notes of roasted nuts and caramel. A warm embrace that beckoned me to take a sip with each taste. I felt the weight of the cup's history pressing against my senses. The flavors were rich and layered, a tapestry woven from the threads of past brews. I could taste the echoes of green teas, the whispers of black teas, and the lingering sweetness of white teas that had come before. It was as if the cup had become a time capsule, preserving the essence of every infusion and allowing me to experience them all at once. As I savored the last drops of the oolong, I noticed something remarkable. The cup's surface, once a uniform ivory, now shimmered with a subtle iridescence, a play of colors that shifted with the light. It was as if the porcelain had absorbed not only the flavors of the teas, but also their spirit, their essence, and now reflected that back to me in a dance of light. I felt a sense of wonder wash over me, a realization that this cup was more than just a vessel. It was a living entity, a partner in my journey through time and flavor. Night fell softly, wrapping the study in a cocoon of quiet. I placed the teacup on the windowsill where moonlight could bathe it in silvery light. The cracks glimmered faintly, and I could see the intricate patterns of crazing more clearly than ever. It was as if the cup was revealing its secrets, inviting me to explore the depths of its history. I reached out to touch its surface, tracing the lines with my fingertips, feeling the texture of the glaze beneath my skin. In that moment, I understood that the teacup was a reflection of my own journey of vessel that had absorbed the experiences of my life, just as it had absorbed the flavors of the teas I had brewed. Each crack and stain told a story, a reminder of the moments that had shaped me. I felt a deep sense of connection to this object, a recognition that we were both evolving, both shaped by the passage of time. As I prepared for bed, I took one last look at the teacup, its surface glowing softly in the moonlight. I felt a sense of gratitude for the rituals we had shared, for the conversations held in silence, and for the memories woven into its very fabric. Tomorrow would bring new teas, new experiences, and new opportunities to explore the depths of this relationship. I knew that with each infusion, the cup would continue to evolve, and I would be there to witness its transformation. The night deepened, and I drifted into sleep, dreaming of the flavors yet to come, the stories yet to be told. The teacup rested quietly on the sill, a sentinel of time, waiting patiently for the dawn to break and the next chapter of our journey to unfold. In the stillness of the night, I felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that the alchemy of tea and time would continue to weave its magic, binding us together in an ever-deepening bond. Winter's first frost painted delicate lace across the study window when I noticed the teacup had developed an impossible characteristic. Overnight, its once uniform crazing had resolved into legible patterns, not simply random cracks, but intricate tracery resembling ancient ideograms, the most distinct. Markings curved around its circumference like a never-ending sentence written in some forgotten ceramic language. I turned the cup slowly beneath the morning light, watching the glyphs appear and disappear depending on viewing angle, their edges shimmering with what looked like crushed pearl embedded in the glazed dot. The discovery coincided with the arrival of an unmarked package containing 7 strange tea bricks wrapped in aged bamboo paper. Their compressed leaves gave off an aroma both earthy and sweet, like forest loam after autumn rains mingled with dried stone fruits. When scraped into the waiting cup, the charcoal-colored flakes proved frustratingly insoluble at normal temperatures, requiring repeated infusions near boiling before reluctantly releasing a liquor the color of well-aged bourbon. Yet the taste justified all effort, cascading through stages of flavor. First, salted caramel, then hickory smoke, finally dissolving into something resembling cold spring water, sipped from cupped hands in a sunlit grove. By the third steep, the cup's mysterious markings began reacting to the exotic tea. What had previously appeared as static designs now pulsed faintly when liquid passed certain points in the cracked network. Closer inspection revealed these locations precisely matched acupuncture meridians depicted in an old Chinese medical scroll I had purchased years ago at a flea market. The vessel was mapping some ancient energy system onto its own structure through its fracture patterns, with this peculiar tea somehow activating the pathways. Each sip sent subtle vibrations traveling through the porcelain's latticework. Tiny tremors I could feel through my fingertips as they resonated along the glyph-like cracks. That evening, I placed the cup alone on the piano's lacquered surface and dimmed the lights. In perfect darkness, those activated pathways glowed jade green, not the faint bioluminescence observed before, a purposeful illumination bright enough to cast thumbnail-sized shadows. The patterns formed perfect mandalas that slowly rotated as perspective changed, suggesting some fourth-dimensional geometry folded into the porcelain structure. When a thunderstorm arrived at midnight, its lightning flashes synchronized exactly with the pulsing glyphs for 3 astonishing seconds. Primary cracks flaring white, while secondary lines answered in emerald, outlining an intricate symbolic language, hovering above the cup's surface like a hologram. Come morning, the phenomenon had faded, though the glyphs remained visible in ordinary light as paler fissures contrasting against the tea-darkened glaze. Brewing ordinary Darjeeling produced no recurrence of the light display. Yet the leaves oriented themselves mysteriously along the crack patterns rather than floating randomly. Only when preparing more of the mystery tea did the cup's hidden behavior reawaken, its luminous circuitry responding specifically to this one rare variety. The brick's faded wrappings bore no markings, but rubbing a damp fingertip across the fibrous paper revealed embossed characters, matching several glyphs now permanently etched into my teacup. Through patient experimentation, I discovered the cup now altered beverages beyond tea. Spring water took on subtle minerality when left standing in it overnight. Coffee developed intriguing floral top notes. Even cheap grocery store chamomile gained dimensional depth bordering on synesthetic experience. Each sip conjuring vivid imagery of sun-baked fields and wood smoke. The vessel had evolved into something between alchemical instrument and recording device, imprinting its accumulated knowledge into whatever liquid it touched. When friends sampled these transformative infusions, they described flavors corresponding to teas I'd served months prior that couldn't possibly linger in cleaned porcelain. November's full moon rising over frost-laced gardens marked another leap in the cup's capabilities. Moonbeams, striking its glyph-patterned surface, projected a shimmering calligraphy onto my study wall. Elegant brushstrokes of light that resolved into a classic Tang Dynasty tea poem when viewed from a specific angle near the window. The verse spoke of dew gathered from autumn maples and midnight steepings under cold stars, its characters wavering like reflections in disturbed water before stabilizing into perfect form. By month's end, I had identified projection patterns for 17 different poems, each triggered by distinct lunar phases and viewing angles, an entire literary library encoded in crazed porcelain and moonlight. The coldest night of December revealed the cup's most astonishing behavior yet. placed alone on the frozen windowsill under clear Arctic air. Its internal fractures began emitting melodic tones, crystalline notes, resonating through the empty vessel as temperature changes made the porcelain contract. Not random pitches, but deliberate progressions resembling ancient Guqin zither compositions. These songs lasted exactly as long as the winter moon remained visible, their scales shifting through modes corresponding to tea varieties previously steeped. The cup had transposed infusion memories into auditory form, its material structure vibrating at precise frequencies to recreate flavor profiles as music. New Year's Day brought epiphany. I'm meditating with the cup cradled in chilled hands. I recognized the glyph patterns weren't merely decorative or energy pathways. They formed a complete notation system. Certain clusters mapped to seasonal weather conditions when specific teas were brewed. Others corresponded to celestial alignments on dates of particular infusions. The vessel had been meticulously recording every variable of our shared tea practice in ceramic cuneiform, preserving an almanac in its fractured glaze. My fingers traced this tactile calendar, feeling winters when oolongs tasted of smoked plum blossom, summers where green teas carried unexpected nutmeg warmth. Each sensation archived in the porcelain's living memory. One question now consumes me as I document these marvels. Is my teacup unique, or do all well-used vessels quietly develop such capacities given enough time and care? Perhaps every chipped mug in grandmother's cupboard vibrates with unheard symphonies. Each crazed pot in an antique shop projects forgotten poetry when moonlight strikes just so. We discard imperfect dishes, unaware of their hidden dimensionality, mistaking patina for damage when it's actually the beginning of translation, the first steps of ordinary objects learning to speak. The teacup sat at the center of my desk, illuminated by the soft glow of early spring sunlight. I had brewed one final pot of Teacup. It's the first variety I had ever poured into this vesseland. Now the steam curled upward in slow, meditative spirals. The cup itself bore witness to years of steeping, its surface a living archive of cracked glaze and tannin-stained memories. Each fissure told a story. Every darkened vein carried the echo of a past brew. Today, I would drink from it for the last time. I had learned that impermanence is the only true constant. The cup had taught me that its beauty was not in spite of its fractures, but because of them. The way certain cracks glowed under moonlight, the way heat animated dormant patterns in its depths, the way it remembered teas long since washed away. These were not flaws, but the final flowering of a thing well used. A perfect cup, fresh from the kiln, holds only potential. This one had been shaped by time, by touch, by the slow alchemy of patience. The tea darkened as it steeped, the water pulling tannins and fragrance from the leaves. I thought of all the conversations this cup had silently witnessed, early mornings spent writing, late nights wrestling with unwritten words, moments of quiet when the only company was steam and the slow cooling of liquid against porcelain. I thought, too, of the questions it had raised, not just about ceramics and chemistry, but about time, attention, coups, and objects we dedicate ourselves to. I lifted the cup and inhaled. The aroma was layered, not just the muscatel brightness of Darjeeling, but the ghosts of puri and oolong and sencha, all the flavors that had passed through over the years. The first sip was warmth and memory. Cup, in its way, had become a collaborator in the brewing. The tea tasted different here than in any other vessel, deeper, richer, threaded with traces of every infusion that came before. Tea, a mundane miracle, a thing altered through use, made better by what it had held and let go. Outside, the jasmine vine had begun to bud. New growth after winter. The study, once a place of solitude, now felt full, not just with books and papers, but with quiet understanding. The teacup had started as an object, then become a companion, then finally a teacher. It showed me that fragility is not the opposite of resilience. It taught me that time is not an eraser, but an artist. Years from now, long after this cup is gone, I will remember the weight of it in my hands, the particular way morning light passed through its cracks, the taste of tea steeped in something that had, in its way, steeped in me. The lesson was never about ceramics. It was about attention, the kind that deepens with repetition, that transforms the mundane into the sacred, not through grand gestures, but through return, through showing up day after day and letting the act itself become the meaning. I finished the last sip. The cup was empty again, but never truly empty, not really, because nothing ever really is. Good night.